It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian, atheist, Muslim, Jew, Taoist, Buddhist, Hindu, etc., etc. You can even be a Satanist. But no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, in your heart, there is only one thing that is sacred. Even if your personal experience has been disappointment, in your heart you still know that the best example of this is the purest definition of what it means to be sacred. And that is motherhood.
ain't taking no more.
Good morning. Almost just choked on my coffee. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Lost Begotten fake TV channel. I am your host, with you as always, Fake TV's, the not so much lost, but morally suppressed begotten. The hidden begotten. Oh wait, there I am. Yeah. Whatever. Today, I just woke up just in a raging fury, just at how society is just going to shit. And like, remember how they were talking about the last hurrah of the storm? To me, the civilian hurricane response, that was like the last hurrah of humanity. They completely failed to organize it into grids. It took basically General Henry complaining just to get them to step up the effort to now half, that's how far they've escalated, to half of the level of the response to Hurricane Katrina. And if you're not familiar, General Henry is the Lieutenant General from Louisiana that oversaw the rescue and recovery efforts following Hurricane Katrina. And I would like to show a compilation of statements in a little while that he's made, because it's very interesting, especially considering that Sean Hannity and the lot have been accusing people of playing politics. Yeah. Every time you want to, ask for competent government now, it's playing politics. Just a quick breakdown. During the response to Hurricane Katrina, they used over 40,000 National Guard and 20,000 Army and Marines. They had 20 ships off the shore, and they used 240 helicopters. They just passed 110, 100 and something helicopters. They just passed 100 helicopters yesterday. My psychic information is conflicting with my data gathered. Yeah, they're probably about up to 112, 120 maybe by now. And they had 15 Coast Guard helicopters and a few civilian helicopters. And then they'd finally gotten some more helicopters as of yesterday. And they had, they're gradually escalating Whereas during Hurricane Katrina, they had pre-positioned 10,000 National Guard. Actually, it was 15,000. I was just going by memory. I didn't take notes on that. And before the evacuation, they had 10. By the time people were evacuating, they had 15,000. And to pre-position National Guard gives you a better chance of saving people from getting washed away, just plain and simple. Because you're talking about people in, mech infantry vehicles. So, half is about what they're up to now. Half of the response. Covering 10 times the area and 5 times as many people. Half. That's how much of a response I get. And in the initial recovery stage, they did not have any coordination of the civilian volunteer. Like basically the Cajun Navy had to coordinate themselves. The new Texas Navy had to coordinate themselves. That's why they're sitting there on the news talking about, get on Zillow. Huh. Really? One thing we haven't talked about a long time that has been coming out of the accuser's mouth lately is how essentially these far-right propagandized Republicans, everything they say when translated equates to them being anarchists. Government bad. Everything they say is basically government bad. Now it's come down to even voting rights bad. Free speech bad. Anarchy has historically led to despotism. Okay? And this is a pattern that anybody of any level of awareness, especially an intelligence society or agency or group of agencies, should be aware of. And that if you sow anarchy, you allow for the rise of a despot. Now, we have evidence that this despot, this person who is capitalizing on the anarchy that has been sown in the hearts of the former Republican Party, it's been decimated. The ideology itself has been decimated. They've lost the conservative core that made them Republicans. The party of Abraham Lincoln, if you will. But even more important than the corruption of the values of the Republican Party is their willingness to capitulate for power's sake. Once they were willing to do that, they had essentially sold the soul of this country. And now we have, like any nation, especially in biblical history, that has sold its soul or gone a whoring after Babylon, we have a prince of the earth. Okay? We have accepted our fall. As long as we accept Trump our voices cannot be heard over that sound. And to seal the deal, we bowed to complacency. To seal the deal that stole the soul out of this country and caused the world to lose faith. We accepted the results of an election, quote unquote, that was completely and in every possible sense illegitimate. And by we, I mean the people on TV. Because I've really struggled. And I like to talk to people. When I go out, like shopping and shit, I like to talk to people. And I've really struggled to find anyone who doesn't think that Hillary Clinton was supposed to win the election, that Hillary Clinton should be president right now, and that Donald Trump is illegitimate and a puppet installed by Russia. And again, I live where the Yankees slash and burned. Okay? I live in central, deep fucking South Louisiana. And I seen this guy saying he's from New Orleans, and his whole channel's pro-Trump, talking about blacks for Trump. Look at this guy. Hey, there's the black guy. Yeah, even black people support Trump. Really? Like just recently, he done posted that shit. And he says he's from New Orleans. He don't talk like nobody from New Orleans I ever heard. Now, it's kind of hard to figure out my accent because I spent half my life in Texas in the Houston area and half my life in the New Orleans area, and now I live north of Baton Rouge. So, you know, I also lived in New Zealand and Australia as a child. So, but I still sound more like I'm from New Orleans than that motherfucker. Go figure. But, you know, I'm sure him and Patricia Steer hang out in the French Quarter all the time. Anyways, so I'm just going to put that little soapbox on standby and say hello. Hello, Carlos. Taylor, I think is hang tight. Hi, Emily. Hi, Maximo. Okay. When you have time, if I'm mayor, I have a question. Always got time for questions. Don't have time to be the mayor. Just fucking with you. Yay, autocorrect. Apparently, there were 2 viewers who weren't satisfied with my teaser section of the speech. Yeah, we're going to go into proving my point later. But anyways. So, most anarchists in the far left, the Antifa, really, spoken like someone who's been programmed by fucking talking points, Carlos. Come on, man, really? I'm, you know, it's hard not to be. I know, it's hard not to be. They just keep on repeating the same shit over and over again. Okay. When I was a young skinhead. When he was a young skinhead. The name of my clique was the H-Town Anarchists. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. The KKK revere the Circled A. You understand? It's code. They speak in code. That's all. And I mean, attributing Antifa to anarchism is literally repeating Fox News talking points. Those people aren't anarchists. There are a few anarchists among them. Those are called provocateurs. That's why that group is sponsored through shadow groups from Russia without love. Oh yeah, I guess I forget the foreign context. Yeah, the namesake, huh? See, I think you're referring to the shit that gets hammered into our heads around here, man. Oh. Oh yeah, feel free to ask your question. That's cool. But, you know, the whole purpose of Antifa is to discredit people who don't like Trump. The whole purpose of Antifa. The whole reason why they get fucking money, okay? They don't even know it. Most of those kids don't have a fucking clue. But you know what? Some of those kids are the children of Russian citizens. I guarantee. I mean, literally. I'll clip a fucking pinky if I'm wrong about that one. That shit started with the Berkeley thing. Okay, that was all fucking staged. That was literally an FSB op. Okay, but from there, they increased their recruitment. Okay, and it's been, you know, running independently since then. They've shown up here and there since then, but again, it's always cored around a central group of provocateurs who don't necessarily know what they're doing or where their money comes from, but a lot of them are the children of those people who were burning documents in that embassy in California yesterday. The consulate building, you know? And that's what happens, man. Like, in Houston, there would be, like, just the sons of people from different interesting areas that happen to be involved in the white nationalist movement in Houston. Argentina was a particularly, I don't know, active area from which they infiltrated, I guess. One of the two of the kids I hung out with, one had lived here his whole life, one had immigrated like 6 years prior. Anyway. Oh, they're called fascists, man. They're not the fucking Tea Party. They're fascists. Okay? They have been fascist the whole time. They call themselves different things. Okay? The far right, the alt-right, they're fascists. They believe that anyone who disagrees with them, anyone who doesn't look like them, anyone who fucking displeases them, should get the fuck on the other side of a border from them. Okay? Whether it's a little fence on the inside or a big fence on the outside. Fascists. But, you know, left or right, it all boils down to Marxism. It all boils down to groups funded by Russia. Okay? And that's been going on for 150 years, my friend. And it's not more on the left or more on the right. It's, you know, a lot like, but not to the same degree or extent, and certainly patterned in different ways. But a lot like how the left infiltrated the education system, the right infiltrated the hot topic news media, you know? And in a lot of ways, this was a repeated pattern from conquest of ages past, in which you would set up people with one ideology only to have it argued later. Okay? So you go in and you convince a bunch of people of one thing with a bunch of lies, and then you send in another person to come in there and say, hey, those are all lies. Follow me. Works like a charm every fucking time. What just happened? You had to change accounts? Alright, well, and culture boss, fascist is. Yeah, I mean, everything that gets pointed out will be abused by the accusers. But, let me put this thing on right quick, because my wife's just getting back, and I wanted to check in on one of the areas I used to live in down there in Texas. And I want to maybe look at some clips, not a live broadcast, but maybe some clips, and just get up to speed on what's going on in Houston. So, here is the latest from Brazoria County. That's where Alvin is. That's where Danny lived, the harmonica player guy. So, check on how he's doing. Maybe we'll see him.
While some people are cleaning out their homes tonight, others are still evacuating.
Yeah, unfortunately, Jason Whiteley shows us what's going on in Brazoria County.
Folks here hoped Harvey had passed.
We fared okay during the actual hurricane, and now we're dealing with all the rainwater runoff and the rivers running together.
The receding flood from Fort Bend County now causing water to rise here in Ridgewood.
We had a little flood last year in June, but nothing like this.
Firefighters let us ride into the Audubon Woods subdivision with them as they took a couple of homeowners back in for a few essentials.
You can't really get mad because there's nothing you can do about it. You just have to just keep praying that when it goes down that we can recover and get back to normal again.
First stop worse than they expected. Water already 6-8 inches deep as firefighters search for prescription pills.
It's a medication for diabetes.
Same scene, house after house. The fire chief driving us down roads he cannot see. Around the corner, Martin Pies' place.
I was expecting a lot more water in here. I'm one of the lucky ones, I guess.
His home has no more than a film of flood water on the floor as he pulled out a hedgehog, computer, and shotguns.
Like they said, after every storm there's a rainbow, so that's what we're hoping for.
On our way back, firefighters noticed this cat clinging to a windowsill in a vacant home, uncertain if it might dart off on them.
It might, but at least we can try.
Water chest deep as they approached to save a little life. The cat apparently too exhausted and nowhere to go. Firefighters floated him inside a bin back to the safety of the truck.
There's no telling how long it's been sitting on that windowsill and just nobody's noticed it.
Receding and recovery, two words that have yet to reach Richwood, where water is now rising. Standing for Houston, I'm Jason Whiteley with KHOU.
A city swamped, homes destroyed, and lives lost. Houston will forever be changed after Harvey.
Certainly will. Ted Land has that story.
Before the storm,
Come up with a sentence. Before the storm, I wasn't selfish, but I was probably more into myself than I should have been. Before the storm, life was normal. I didn't appreciate these blue skies so much.
life in Houston has changed. But how?
Before the storm, I mean, I really didn't have any fear.
For volunteers who rushed into shelters, Harvey challenged them to look inward.
Before the storm, I was really focused on materialistic things and just not being as appreciative as I should of the life that I live.
After the storm,
It makes me want to be able to go out in the community more and give back more than I've done in the past. After the storm, it just made you realize how just the little things mean so much.
The storm has been pretty good. I've been getting everything that I need, and so I can't ask for anything else, but just accept the help that I'm getting.
for evacuees like Terrell Lewis, the flooding has, in a twisted way, helped him appreciate this place he calls home.
My life now is a little more enriched simply because of the Houstonians. We all came together, man. We took care of our own.
After the storm, it's kind of like, do whatever it takes, kind of, move. You really open your eyes to what's more important in life, and there are bigger things, and just don't take life for granted, because it can be over like that.
Amid the destruction, Harvey left perspective.
Yeah, it's a huge eye-opener.
It should be called a city of help, because they are helping me and a lot of other people. And I'm thankful for what you're doing.
Standing for Houston, I'm Ted Land with KHOU.
And I love these people, and I love this town.
I got out of the station today, and everywhere I went, everyone smiled and acknowledged each other and was so friendly. I think we are forever changed.
Yes, but it's always been a friendly town. I
It
really
has.
love it. Coming up.
Well, I don't know about all that, man. I mean, like, the rich people have always been friendly with each other. You heard that there? He said Houston's always been a friendly town.
I can't say anything because honestly I've never been to Houston,
Oh.
but I've not heard good things.
Yeah, not so much. Like, the rich people are very nice to each other in the downtown area, and they're very good at shunning poor people. And, like, Houston's a very cliquey town. Very cliquey town. But good for them that they're starting to see the value of unity. And good for Mike Pence that he's starting to see that we're what's the phrase, dear?
Strong?
Stronger. How are we stronger? When we're what's that other word? Stronger. Stronger. Pleather? No, stronger.
Leather.
Stronger feathers. No. Stronger toucans. Stronger toucan feathers. Yes.
We are stronger toucan feathers.
No, let's be serious. We're stronger,
Yeah.
you know, like together. Oh.
What a
It's like it's a thing. You know, stronger together. It's got a nice ring to it. Somebody should run for president on that. Anyway. stronger adhesive properties.
Yes.
Excellent. My YouTube comment and molds. Oh man. No clue. Stronger toucan feathers. Many colors, yes. Oh wait, so Joseph wasn't a werewolf, he was a toucan?
Wah, 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 wah. He forgot about Fluffy.
What?
What?
Oh, okay. Anyways. So, Brazoria is evacuating. Oh, jeez.
And throughout all of the devastation, we now know at least 100,000 structures
Lost Begotten,
were
Typhon
damaged
Blue.
by this storm.
Tonight, we're taking you to Forest Cove, that's just south of Kingwood, where homes were literally washed away. Here's Matt Doherty with their story.
Like, that's not really anything. It's not. I don't even know why I'm bothering you. It's not anything. But it's mine.
Joy Rizzi's entire life is somewhere in here.
I have a lifetime already that I collected things, and that was all.
She's a former Marine. Can be tough. But this time it's too much.
I don't have my pictures of my daughter and my son growing up. I don't have anything.
This neighborhood has withstood floods in the past, but not this time. Last week, 3 homes stood where today you only see an empty space. They disappeared. Rizzi believes somewhere down the river. Washed away by force, she says.
This is violence. This is deadly violence. This is destructive violence.
Rizzi says if the water from Lake Conroe had been released sooner, maybe even before the storm arrived, some of these shattered pieces of her past might still be salvageable.
I never expected this. 5 feet, they kept telling us until they opened the floodgates. 5 feet. I can handle 5 feet. I lived through the 5 feet. I stayed here for the 5 feet. And then they opened the floodgates. 79,000 cubic feet per second. I mean, we knew we were going to be slammed.
Standing for Houston, I'm Matt Doherty, KHOU.
How do you have a floodgate system that just destroys fucking everything in its path? That's retarded. I'm not sure if that was Forest Cove. I think that's just south of Barker Cypress, so that'd be the Barker Reservoir. I think. It's been a long time since I lived in Houston. And I lived there when it was less friendly. Maybe it's been a friendly town recently, but recently they've been united in their citywide hatred of Donald Trump. But oh, speaking of which, isn't he supposed to go there today? Everybody say a prayer, but don't say what it's for. My wife is still smiling at that one. So, dear, do you think a democracy can withstand a meaningless election that installs a dictator from Russia? you know, being that you're from Yugoslavia and you've kind of been noticing things differently your whole life, does it seem like this is still America to you now that we've had an election decided by a group of fucking rich white men who all get paid by Russia?
What's in America?
Right? Does that sound familiar to you anyway? A group of rich men who've all been paid off by the Kremlin?
Oligarchs.
Deciding the fate of a nation? And aren't they usually in about maybe a third majority?
Oh, yeah.
Like, is about by the third they have fallen? Sort of the ratio of demons in the Bible, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just happens to be that. Right? Generally speaking, once a nation has fallen, it does get ruled by the third. And such is the given reference in the Bible when such things are stated to be reduced. Bing! Yeah. I'm not going to clarify that statement. Let those with eyes hear what I'm saying. Joey! Oh look, more people join us and the number of viewers goes down.
Woohoo!
Interesting how that works. Might just start keeping that visible shit. There we go. I'm not visible. That could be visible. How about that? I am the eye of the storm. You can call me Irma. Really? Irma? My name's Irma. And the media is trying to make money off of me, even though they know I'm not going to fucking do anything. Yeah. Anyways. Like, they keep on bringing that shit up on CNN, man. They can't get enough of that on CNN. Oh boy, they can't talk about Irma enough on CNN. I'm sure Fox News is having a field day with it too, but I try to avoid Fox News like the plague. So anyways. Cool. Beautiful. Gonna be delivering some fish today.
Yay! We're making room for the new babies that we want to...
Yeah, I'm making room for some water quality is what I'm making room for. I just did a big clean out last night, and the reef tank is looking rather lovely. But I'm gonna get up and maybe show y'all that for a second if I can get the webcam to focus, because it does look rather lovely at the moment. Fishy wishies. Okay, I need more laptop room. The cord is not long enough. So unfortunately, you'll have to look at my face for a second. I do apologize. I know that can be damn near unbearable. Yes, I'm trying to finagle things here with one hand. Okay. Lift up the table. Beautiful. No, just put it back down. Alright. Alright, nobody trip over that cord. Sorry if y'all are getting a view of my boogers and shit right now. That cigarette was kind of burning itself out with it. Okay, so let's see here. Now I have the cord, I just have to get it untangled. I'm going to put some stuff away right quick so y'all can see better. So, yeah, you can hear me better, but there's going to be a little echo. Trying to make the view better right quick, but I have to do some finagling, as it were. Oh, I know. Maybe less finagling, and I'll just move it to this screen. Ah. Pretty fishies, ugly forehead. My freaking my dragon's breath got yanked up, but it's just kind of hanging out back there. There you can actually see my little guy, the yellow Monty right there. Blue mushrooms, green stripy mushrooms, candy cane, Kenya tree, rainbow Monty. I love that rainbow Monty. Varieties, growing rather nicely, and that one, it glows like this rose red color at night. And This is like a one guy had one at Magna, said it was a sand dollar Monty. But it's actually been growing pretty well too, as you can see. It's about maybe gained 20% of its size. Now this guy here, it got knocked over. It was sitting right there, and I moved it here, but I'm worried that it's not going to get enough light right there, so I'm not sure if I'm going to keep it right there. And then, of course, there's the pulsating zinnias in the back there.
Just so you know, the fish was
Come on, man. Come on. Something in here. Okay. We have focus. And up on this glass right here, the reason why I'm not cleaning this lower section of the glass is because I have stomatellis. Little tiny baby stomatellis. And I don't think I can. I can try. I'm going to need like a really good angle. Let's see if I can get it to focus on that. That right there is a baby stomatella. That's actually really good. Holy crap. Oh my goodness, look at the screen. See if I can get closer. Oh, no.
Look at the mer.
Okay, even further.
Ah.
Further.
Where'd it go? No, the little baby.
That is a baby stomatella. There's another one right there, I think. There you go. And then that's a copepod. There you go. It's moving. Where'd you go, little baby? There he is.
Oh, the mer. The little antenna. Oh.
So they're still semi-pelagic at that stage. He can actually break off and swim away still. He's got like little flagellas that are going to compose his mantle. The camera is up against the glass. That's pretty cool. I didn't know it could do this. It's cool. So what is that one? So that is one. Okay, there's two of them. That's one. Oh, he's pooing. Oh, look at that. He's just like squirting out little poo streams. I thought that was some kind of like tentacle coming out. Like I thought he was facing the other way. He moves one. Damn, like it's hard to practice singing while laughing. Okay, so like I thought he was, facing this way, right? Down to the bottom right of the screen. That looks like the way he's been going, and you can kind of see his little antenna right there. But then you see like that right there. But it actually detaches from the body before it dissipates. See that? It's shut off. That's him pooing. He's pooing. You go, little guy. That means he's growing well, right? If he's, either that or he's got diarrhea.
That's not good.
Which I apologize for the Taco Bell algae. I don't know. Yep, sorry, there's going to be an echo. I'm using two things. Where'd he go? So yeah. There wasn't quite a few. I was kind of scaring them down yesterday as I was cleaning the glass. There's copepod. So yeah, as you can see, I got a hell of a lot of plankton in my tank. Still kind of difficult to decide on a focus. Guess that means it's not full of shit anymore. Are you calling my stomatella a liar? Okay, that's definitely gone the wrong way. Let's do the trial and error on this. At least I know where the hell he is. I'm sorry, guys. I'm fascinated by this. That's like the best view I've had of him yet. There's another one. Oh, now I'm on the fence. Is that antenna or poo? I don't know which way he's facing. I have no idea anymore. Is it antenna or is it poo now? You know, if I come across something that looks like a stomatella larvae and I've just been staring at some kind of pod that I didn't know about, that's going to piss me off. Wouldn't surprise me. Tube worm. Little tiny tube worm growing on the glass. Looks like on the gravel. Oh, there's another one. I'm pretty sure those are stomatellas. I've never seen them before until after the spawn event occurred. So. Yeah, it's like Hubble,
Yeah,
only
it's like
real.
Hubble, only real.
That looks like it might be one too. There's another one. Might be another one right there. How long can you stare at specks on a glass without smoking pot? That, I wish I knew what kind of pod that is. I got a lot of those. Mandarins love them. It's the type of Kopi pod right there. The lost begotten may not be used as a flotation device. This is how a Japanese man has sex. Focus. Yes! Okay. Robin Williams tribute. That's all. Just a Robin Williams tribute. I would do an impression of how Robin Williams had sex, but I'm just the demigod. But what? Oh!
And thank you.
Yes, dear.
Are you gonna like it really hot and pretty?
Doing that right now would let it get really hot in this house. Alright, so I think there's a couple of them in this tank, but I don't see any on this front glass in here. Because it would have to make it from this tank to the bottom tank back up to this tank. So I think it's safe to clean the glass here. God forbid y'all should be able to see the fish. Looks like I got some kind of concentrated algae goo stuck on my glass here. You know, aside from all the other crap. So now we can watch fishies while listening to news. That just makes more sense to me, because that's what I do. I put the news on, and then I stare at the fish tanks, right? So now y'all get to experience what I get to experience. It's a lot less stressful. AM Joy, eh?
On his threats to potentially shut down the government.
Oh my God. That was loud. That was really loud.
Bring on that. What are the expectations?
Well, Alex, the president originally said that if they don't get $1.6 billion in funding to build this wall, that he would potentially shut down the government. Now that has, clearly in recent weeks backed off of that.
Okay, so the president is arriving in Texas, in Houston.
Again?
Yeah. Still people being fucking rescued, and he's going back there again. Hasn't been 2 weeks, which would be standard time for the president to wait before visiting. Did I just call him the president? Oh my God. I have to go chew on soap now. Oh, cracked. If you don't feel like watching the fishies, you can come back here and chat in a few minutes. After you go watch Cracked, they just uploaded a new Some News video, and I love that little broadcast. That guy's fucking brilliant. He's hilarious. Go check that out. I won't hold it against you. The fish will be here. You know, support other channels that aren't fuckers. Okay, so in the meantime, I'm going to put on interesting Maddow report last night that I didn't get to finish watching. GOP leaders urge Trump not to end the Dreamer program. Okay, not that one. There we go. That'll work. Something on some Russian hacking efforts.
An illegal request for blood of a patient. The former chair of the leading police oversight agency joins me. Before we turn to our next story, I want to show you some live images coming into our newsroom now, 6:30 p.m. East Coast time, 5:30 in Crosby, Texas, where you see this fire raging. This is a chemical plant that was hurt and affected by Hurricane Harvey. We were told here the petrochemicals in the labs and in the plant there, and you can see obviously a fire that is not anywhere near under control, that is billowing a very heavy and black smoke from the wide shot as we pull out. And obviously authorities, we understand, are en route trying to deal with it. We don't have more information yet, but wanted to show you this, a story of obvious proportions related to both the hurricane and the risk faced by locals there. Crosby, Texas, 5:27 p.m. local time. We are monitoring it, and we'll bring you updates here throughout the hour and throughout the evening on MSNBC as we learn what's happening there. Obviously, a dangerous scene unfolding in Crosby, Texas. I want to turn now to this other story I mentioned, developing news about how Vladimir Putin is continuing attacks on the United States election system and public debate. Bloomberg reporting today Pro-Russian cyber attackers are trying to undermine the U.S. political system. This is not a story about 2016. This is a story about now and the future, and the, quote, ferocity of more recent assaults, a preview of what could come in the midterms. Trump, meanwhile, insisting Russia may not even be behind the 2016 hacks. The report showing Putin continues to infiltrate American debate. Bloomberg cites as an example John McCain, who was on Twitter after Trump's comments about Charlottesville urging a more forceful condemnation of bigotry. And with hours, there was a coordinated counterattack on Twitter, pro-Russian bot cyborgs promoting accusations that it was McCain allied with neo-Nazis in the past. For the story, we go to Bloomberg's national security reporter, Nafisa Saeed, who broke it. Do we have Nafisa Saeed? We are in live TV, and sometimes we see the wrong person. That's Michael Daniel, just so viewers understand, who is Barack Obama's former cyber chief and a great guest. But Nafisa, we go to you first. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
What did you find here, and what is the link back to Russia?
Well, I spoke to a lot of researchers. This has become sort of an emerging field. So last year we heard a lot about Russian meddling, but these researchers, and some of these are recent efforts within this year that have started, they really go in and track what they're seeing as what they call Russian bot and cyborg activity. So some of these are automated accounts, some of them have some human element, especially on Twitter. But we're also seeing these kinds of attacks move to other sites like Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. And so what we're seeing is whether we can say they're actually directly from the Kremlin. Some researchers say they are, but at least we can say they're what researchers call pro-Russian or Russia-linked or Russian-aligned. And they tend to really promote certain narratives that seem to either favor Russia or favor Russian kinds of interests or what they call influence operations.
So to drill on that, how does it favor Russia to falsely accuse John McCain of having these links?
Well, it's a way to discredit someone who has been critical of Russia, for instance. And so this way, what researchers tell me is what they're seeing is that these kinds of efforts where they can take, say, opinions that are on the fringe of the internet and try to, as much as possible, gain traction over, sort of on social media so that it becomes part of a mainstream narrative. And so that's part of what we saw that researchers tracked at the Digital Forensic Research Lab around John McCain. Within minutes, somehow they were trying to create this narrative, even if it was based on truth that, Senator McCain had visited Ukraine and met with some leaders that they accused of having neo-Nazi roots. But what we're seeing then is how they're taking that narrative and trying to push it to then question, how can someone like John McCain condemn what President Trump's reaction to Charlottesville, and that's when this happened, that's important to note as well, sort of banking on these very high-profile events and shaping narratives around that.
Well, and your reporting is such key context because people could go online that day or that week and think they're looking at something that reflects some kind of American debate, whether they agree with it or not. It actually is reflecting, as you say, these Russian-linked attempts to do something that is totally unrelated. It's just fascinating. Nafisa Saeed, thanks for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.
I want to turn, as promised, to this other news on Russia's hacking. The New York Times reporting that in the 2016 election there were rampant problems in the state and local voting systems, and they were, quote, more widespread than previously thought, impacting voter registration, local databases, and more. Michael Daniel, who served as cybersecurity coordinator in the Obama White House, tells the Times in this news story, we don't know if any of the problems were an accident, the random problems you get with computer systems, or whether it was a local hacker or, get this, actual malfeasance by a sovereign nation state. With me now is Michael Daniel, and back with me Malcolm Nance. And Michael, you got a preview a moment ago when we showed you. In the earlier segment, you are saying something here in I know a measured and careful way, but something with big implications, which is the months-old talking point that 2016 hacking didn't result in any change of outcome may be overstated, and that there may be larger problems in how far hackers got in 2016?
So I would say that I would still stand behind the statement that the outcome of the election was not affected by anything that the Russians did. But I would say that it takes a long time to do the forensics work to find out exactly how far any hackers may have gotten into the systems that
How can you constantly repeat that lie and call yourself a human being? Why do they always just feel like they have to fucking say that? What Google AdWords program is paying people $10,000 fucking dollars every time they say the word? The hacking didn't affect the outcome of the election. Okay, let's get this straight. They hacked to prevent people from voting. They hacked to sway people's opinion. They hacked to rig some votes themselves. They hacked to get Donald Trump elected, who was way behind in the polls and who basically nobody of any good conscience really wanted elected. Yet he got fucking quote unquote elected. How can you say that the hacking had no influence? They got what they wanted, the American people didn't.
May have been targeted during the 2016 election.
And so, I mean, again, the headline, the Times story goes deep and you're in it, but it seems to suggest that the actual way we do local elections may have been more affected or intruded than previously reported.
Well, certainly it shows the vulnerability of the systems that are spread across this country at the state and local level that definitely need to be shored up in the future. As your previous story was talking about, it's clear that the Russians and others will probably make similar attempts in the future, and we need to be increasing the security of our electoral infrastructure.
Malcolm, my observation is it doesn't seem like this is going the normal way of investigations when people say, well, we'll see where all the facts lead. There was a rush, I think, to kind of calm people about all this. And now, in dribs and drabs at the local level, when the forensics, as Michael says, haven't even been finished, we're hearing, oh, actually, some of these hackers linked to Russia or wherever may have gotten in deeper.
Well, we heard about this story last year where we discovered that electoral rolls in several states had been probed by a foreign actor. Some subcontractors to other states have been probed by foreign intelligence agency, believed to be the Russian military intelligence, the GRU.
Right.
You know, until I read that Times story this morning, I was part of that group that believed, hey, you know, the Russians didn't manage to get down to the electoral process. President Obama warned them off of that. That story makes me wonder. There has been no forensics done on this. No one has really looked backwards to see. Certainly Homeland Security hasn't. And this is a national infrastructure project because, look, Russia has weaponized information and has learned to effectively attack democracy with our own democratic systems. It must be looked into.
And Michael, briefly, is the Trump administration taking this seriously enough?
Well, I can't really speak for all the work that the Trump administration is doing, but certainly some of the officials they have in place, such as Tom Bossert and Rob Joyce at the White House, will take this very seriously.
Michael, you're making my head spin. You directed cyber for Obama. The President of the United States says he can't say whether Russia was behind this, and you don't know whether they're taken serious?
Well, I think that the individuals that they have in various places across the government do take this very seriously, and there are a lot of career staff at both the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI.
What about the president?
I can't really speak for how this president is treating this issue.
I appreciate your service, and I understand you're measured. Malcolm Nance, Michael Daniel, thank you both. Concerning stuff ahead. Is there a Republican revolt? McCain says Donald Trump is poorly informed, and it's his call about what Congress is doing next. Turning to politics, next month could be even harder for Donald Trump than expected. Congress comes back to D.C. next week, and some are in revolt. John McCain with a blistering message to Trump saying we're not his subordinates, we don't answer to him, we must serve as a check on his power, and that Trump is poorly informed, it can be impulsive. Now that's pressure from lawmakers. That's before Trump, of course, moves forward on an expected decision on DACA, the program that provides a place for children who came to this country, who were brought to this country as children, to stay in this country. Also pressure on a potential shutdown, funding for Harvey, and then this Hail Mary tax reform. Meantime, the Washington Post reporting that Trump still calls his former chief strategist, Steve Bannon, from the personal phone when General Kelly is not around. With me on the politics, Governor Howard Dean and the Daily Beast, Aaron Gloria Ryan, and Michael Tomasky. Governor, take your pick. What do you think?
Two things. First, McCain's a maverick, so he doesn't speak for anybody in the Senate besides himself, with the possible exception of Lindsey Graham. Let's see if others say this. Second of all, however, McCain just got back from Arizona. My personal belief is that what's going on in Arizona is putting Arizona in play for the Democrats in 2018 in the Senate race. And if DACA happens to be overturned, I can't imagine how the Latino community is not going to vote about 90% Democratic and they're going to come out. That is the single biggest issue and the single most unfair issue and the single most sort of persecutorial issue, if you will, that's going to motivate Hispanics in 2018.
Well, I think this is John McCain's way of saying, I like presidents who don't alienate their own party. This was, talk is cheap, though, because John McCain, on one hand, for all of his kind of saber-rattling about Donald Trump, in a lot of ways has sort of fallen into line with the rest of the party. I think this kind of serves as a warning to Trump that he can't act like he is the boss of them anymore, of course. But it also highlights the fact that during 2017, Trump has had no major legislative accomplishments.
Nada.
And if he wants to have legislative accomplishments, he has to start playing nice with his own guys.
Right. And Michael Tomasky, that goes to the old saying, nobody knew tax reform would be this hard.
One of my favorite old sayings. But I think we all did know tax reform was going to be this hard, or all of us but one. Tax reform on a major scale hasn't happened, Ari, as you know, since 1986. There's a reason for that. It's big, it's complicated, there are a lot of moving parts. There aren't actually more lobbyists in Washington now than there were back then, I don't think, but they're spending 2 or 3 times the money that they were back then. It's a very difficult thing to do, and I actually looked up today, thinking about coming on here tonight, how the vote went in 1986 on the tax reform bill. Stunningly bipartisan. Majorities of Democrats and Republicans in both houses voted for it. That's something that would never, ever happen today.
I mean,
and Trump's lack of engagement and his low approval rating both combined to make it that much harder.
Right, that's fascinating. You're speaking to legislative strategy. There are some things that tend to happen on party line. Historically, taxes require more. Governor Dean, I don't know how much you listen to Jay-Z, but, he said if money talks, the whole world's about to hear me out. And that's true whenever you go at the tax code. The money talks. People get mad when they figure out whether you're going to hit their pocketbook and their paycheck, right? How hard is it to actually get bipartisan tax reform?
Well, what they'll probably do is just pass tax reform and run the deficit up, which, interestingly, the Committee for Responsible Budget, which is a more Republican-leaning organization, is very much against, as you might suspect. But I think Michael's right. It's almost impossible to do this with a margin of 2 votes in the Senate. And so I just don't see how they're going to get this done and make the kinds of compromises. Not only is Trump obviously is an incompetent president, but you've also got the most bitterly divided legislature that I've seen in my lifetime. I don't see how they do this.
And Aaron, there is an Obama effect here that even Donald Trump, a Republican Congress, are having trouble undoing some of the humanitarian or progressive things he's done. Let me read you a quote about DACA. Quote, "These are kids who know no other country." Who said it? Is it a liberal? Is it a progressive? Is it an Obama official? It's Paul Ryan today embracing an Obama rule because once it was put in place, they don't want to undo it.
Right. And, it would be one thing if Donald Trump had any political capital to spend on, undoing something that sounds so terrible to undo, but he really doesn't have any political capital to expend. He's extremely unpopular. He's unpopular to the point that he has alienated his own party. Like John McCain, who knows what he wanted to accomplish by writing this op-ed. But I sort of think that either way...
I think it was a long tweet storm.
Yeah, it was a very long tweet storm. That's the way the president would understand it. I think that it was maybe just giving the president a middle finger was its own end. Maybe it wasn't like that he really thought that anything would happen. He just wanted Donald Trump to feel bad, and that's enough for him.
Well, you know what they say about feelings?
What do they say about feelings?
They feel better when you let them out.
Our show starts right now with Joy Reid in for Rachel. Good evening, Joy.
Thank you very much, Chris and Lawrence. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. All right, you too. And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Rachel will be back next week. And we have a ton and a half to tell you about this evening. The White House has spent the week hinting and signaling about an imminent decision from the president on the fate of 800,000
tonight, the chemical plant that we've been telling you about in Crosby, Texas, the Arkema plant that had to be abandoned in the flood, tonight, towers of flame erupted from that plant. And we have an intriguing new glimpse into the Trump-Russia investigation and what the special counsel's office is looking at now. All of that is ahead tonight. But we begin tonight with a weather report. It was a scorcher in San Francisco today. The high was 99 degrees. Now, a normal summer in San Francisco can be quite chilly. But today it was so hot.
I wonder if Suzanne Vega put on a free concert.
For San Francisco, calling for dangerously hot conditions heading into Labor Day weekend. And on this absurdly hot day in San Francisco, the people inside, this was the Russian consulate in San Francisco today, black smoke billowing out of the chimney, right next to that Russian flag waving around in the San Francisco heat. Now, obviously, it is not normal to see smoke pouring out of a fireplace on one of the hottest days of the year, so somebody actually called the fire department. And when the fire department showed up, the Russian diplomat said, basically, don't worry, you guys, we're all good here. The Russian consulate actually turned the fire department away. The diplomats would not let them into the building. As the Associated Press reported today that this Russian consulate staff told the fire department that they were burning unidentified items in a fireplace. Nothing to see here, you guys, but thanks for stopping by. Now, even on a normal day, this is totally bizarre, right? There are lots of ways to get rid of things that you don't want in office. I hear that Staples has a great deal on shredders. But this was not a normal day at the Russian consulate because yesterday, the State Department told the Russian government to pack up and get out of San Francisco pronto. The U.S. told Russia yesterday their diplomats have to vacate the consulate in San Francisco by Saturday, as well as 2 annexes in New York and D.C. as part of the ongoing retaliation over Russia hacking our election, which is why that smoke today pouring out of that Russian chimney was so suspicious. The flames went up less than a day before they had been ordered to vacate the premises. Now, my guess is they were not making s'mores. Now, a lot of what happens between the United States and Russia, especially in this complicated, weird time for our two countries, goes on in secret. It doesn't usually play out in the bright light of day. There are secret cables and phone calls. There are closed-door meetings. There's espionage and undercover spies. But today, there was smoke in San Francisco in a heat wave, which is funny. But what the two sides are fighting about is not funny at all. Russia really did attack us last year in a few very different ways. There was the attack on our political system, on our political parties, the Russian hack of the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign. There was the attack on you, Russia spreading disinformation through social media to try and tip public opinion toward Donald Trump. And there was one more prong to this attack, one really important weapon in Russia's arsenal that has not gotten nearly as much attention. And that is the attack on our election, on our infrastructure, on the actual ways that we vote in this country. This show has reported a lot on how elections in this country are decentralized. We talk about how a single election is not really a single election, but really a bit like picking a president is like a big clump of small individual elections all over the country, thousands and thousands of them. Which is why if you wanted to try and hack the election, if you wanted to break into voting machines and start running up the score for the candidate of your choice, it would actually be really hard. You can't just pop the hood and start cutting wires. You'd have to crack 9,000 different systems across 50 different states. But physically changing the vote totals is not the only way to swing the outcome of an election. Another way to do it, an easier way to do it, is to keep actual people from voting in the first place. This show, for example, has talked about what happened in Dallas County in Texas before people started heading to the rolls in Dallas County this time last November. Before that happened, something alarming started happening to the voting systems there. The FBI had sent out this scary-looking flash to election officials all across the country before the election. Local counties were given IP addresses and web servers connected to hackers that the FBI said were trying to break into electoral systems. The federal authorities wanted local officials to run a check to make sure that there were no signs of those IP addresses in their systems. And when Dallas County ran that check, they found out not just one, but they actually found 17 computers from 17 of those addresses flagged by the FBI that they had tried to break into Dallas County's voter rolls, at least some of which were from computers in Russia.
Dallas County has over 1 million voters in its database. It has your name, your date of birth, your addresses, which determines where you get to vote. In a place like Dallas County, which is a blue county, the voter rolls are packed with Democrats. Now, Dallas County is a bright blue dot in that sea of red. Hillary Clinton lost the state of Texas in the presidential election, but she won Dallas County by a whopping 26 points. Dallas is a center of Democratic votes in the state of Texas. So when local reporters asked a couple of neighboring Republican counties whether they also experienced attempts to hack in, the Republican county said no, not as far as they could tell. So the Democratic-leaning county was targeted. Its Republican neighbors were not. There was a lot at stake here. If you're able to get into that election system and start messing around with all those voter files, you could actually do some serious damage just by changing one digit, for instance, in someone's address, or by changing a letter in their name. You could presumably keep thousands and thousands of voters from casting ballots. That is how you swing an election. Without changing one digit of the vote tallies, you can keep people from actually voting. You can actually create chaos at the polls, which brings us to a place called Durham, North Carolina.
Welcome to the Election HQ on election night. I'm Tisha Powell.
Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Daniels. We'll be here all night watching the big races on air.
Big news at this hour, 8 Durham precincts extending voting hours. Some as little as 15 minutes, others extending a full hour to 8:30.
This comes after several precincts had problems with the voting check-in system. The computers didn't work right, so they went to paper books.
Durham County has more Democrats than any other county in North Carolina. On election night, Durham's voting machines were working just fine. It was the voting check-in system that was causing problems. When voters gave their names to sign at the polls, lots of people were told that they were ineligible to vote for a variety of reasons. Local officials blamed a combination of human error and software malfunctions. But it turns out that the company had also been hit by Russian hackers months before the election. Now, it's unclear how many people were kept from voting because of that check-in problem in Durham, or how many people got frustrated by the delays and the long lines because of that problem and just gave up. Nor is it clear that the hacking created problems at the polls. The company officials believe that they fended off the hackers, and there's a lot that we don't know about what happened in Durham, North Carolina, and across the country. But just today, we got this unsettling report from the New York Times, that the hacking of our electoral systems is, quote, more extensive than previously disclosed. Besides the company in North Carolina, quote, hackers breached at least 2 other providers of critical election services well ahead of the 2016 voting. The officials would not disclose the names of the companies. All this time after the election, the Times reports that local and state and federal agencies have conducted little of the type of digital forensic investigation that's required to assess the impact, if any, on voting in at least 21 states whose election systems were targeted by Russian hackers. Now, our next major election is around the corner. The midterms are next November. So who will be sure that we are ready? And joining us now is Susan Greenhalgh, an election specialist with a nonprofit called Verified Voting Foundations. And Susan Greenhalgh was monitoring those problems in Durham, North Carolina during the last election. Ms. Greenhalgh, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So could you just explain to us sort of what were the kinds of problems that people were having when they tried to vote in Durham?
So I was working at the Election Protection Coalition hotline. We were taking calls from people that were having trouble voting on Election Day. We got a lot of calls from people right off the bat in Durham County unable to vote because there were information.
I don't understand why people aren't sucked into this. This is seriously crucial information.
You have the electronic poll book, and the information there was wrong. Either people were told that they had the wrong address, they were at the wrong location, they had voted early, they had voted during absentee.
This happened to me.
When they were saying, I know I didn't vote early, I was at my cousin's wedding the day they told me that I did. So the people were being told that they couldn't vote, and the poll books were taken offline in the entire county, which then caused greater problems because now nobody could vote.
Now, were you able to determine that these kinds of problems that you saw taking place in Durham did not happen in more Republican counties? Was it specifically a problem just in Durham?
There were problems in different counties in North Carolina, not anywhere near as widespread as Durham. They were much more pronounced and intensified there. We had some problems, but I didn't look at how they broke down as far as the demographics go. We're just worried to make sure people got there to vote and got to be able to cast their vote.
And is there a way to determine definitively if the problems that we saw in Durham were because of a hack system or system malfunction?
So that's the important question, because if you were trying to mess with the polls and mess with the voter rolls to keep people from voting, you would cause the type of chaos that we saw on the ground in Durham to keep people from being able to cast their vote. But we don't know if that was caused by some benign malfunction or by some malicious attack. But what's worrisome is that it was the same vendor that had been targeted by the Russians.
And it was the same vendor that had been determined in other states, you're saying, that had been targeted by Russians?
The same vendor had been identified in a news story before the election and subsequently in an NSA document that was leaked, as you probably know from Reality Winner.
Now, do we know whether or not that vendor is still being used in North Carolina, and whether there's been anything done post-election to try to mitigate against the same thing happening again?
So the vendor is still being used in North Carolina and in many states, but they did an investigation, but it wasn't really a very strong forensic investigation where you would want to have one with somebody with really serious security chops looking at the code or looking at the audit logs. Hopefully they're doing a further examination now, although it's a little late. It should have, in my mind, been done a little bit earlier. But the way to best protect this is to have really strong contingency plans, have election officials aware of backup poll books that they can use. Part of the problem in the county is that the electronic poll book provided an authorization to vote form where the voters signed in, and that was done on electronic interface. Now the poll books aren't working. Now you need a paper version of that, but they only had a couple of those in each of the emergency books, so they had to send people to Kinko's to make copies of the authorization to vote form. That further delayed the voting, caused the lines, caused people to perhaps leave.
And are you worried about the next election in North Carolina?
I'm worried about the next election across the country because we really need to take this seriously. This is a national security issue. This is something where we have a foreign adversary coming to try to disrupt the legitimacy of our government and the legitimacy of our elections, and we really need to be protecting all parts of our election infrastructure.
Yeah, and do you feel the state is taking it seriously now?
I think they might be now.
They might be now. All right, well, a little publicity sometimes goes a long way.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Susan Greenhall, election specialist for verified voting. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. All right. And I just want to add that in addition to the burning of unidentified items at the Russian consulate in San Francisco, Foreign Policy Magazine posted this video of something burning outside the Russian Trade Representative building this afternoon. Moving on, we promised a glimpse tonight inside the Trump-Russia investigation. But first, let's look back to early May.
Did the president fire Director Comey to impede the Russia investigation?
Well, as you know very clearly, as has been stated repeatedly and the president has been told, he's not under investigation. There is no evidence of collusion.
But the director clappered
between our campaign and any Russian officials.
But intelligence officials have said there's investigation into potential ties between campaign officials and Russian officials.
That's not what this was about. What about the president's dissatisfaction with the Russian probe? Did that play into this, sir? And let me be very clear that the president's decision to accept the recommendation of the Deputy Attorney General and the Attorney General to remove Director Comey as the head of the FBI was based solely and exclusively on his commitment to the best interest of the American people.
That was Vice President Mike Pence the day after President Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey, repeatedly and emphatically denying that it had anything to do with the Russia investigation. Rather, the president was simply following the advice of his Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General in his decision to terminate the FBI director. Of course, Trump's termination letter also included this memorable line: "While I greatly appreciate you informing me on 3 separate occasions that I'm not under investigation, I nevertheless concur with the Department of Justice that you are not able to effectively lead the Bureau." Trump would essentially blow a hole in his own defense just a few days later in an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, in which he admitted that he indeed had Russia on his mind when he made the decision. Now, today, both the New York Times and the Washington Post are reporting that Comey's termination letter wasn't the only letter drafted by the president. Special Counsel Robert Mueller is now reviewing a separate letter drafted by the president and a top aide days before he fired James Comey.
According to the Post, the multi-page letter enumerated Trump's long-simmering complaints with Comey, including Trump's, quote, frustration that Comey was unwilling to say publicly that Trump was not personally under investigation. According to the reports, the original letter, which the president drafted with the help of his policy advisor, Stephen Miller, was never sent, after aides, including White House counsel Don McGahn, found it problematic and advised against sending it. Now that letter is in the hands of the special counsel, where it will likely become key evidence in the investigation into whether the Comey firing was part of an effort to obstruct justice in the Russia investigation. And joining us now is Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor and MSNBC legal analyst. Good to have you here, Paul.
Great to be here.
So let's talk about what does appear to be Donald Trump's ongoing complaints, at least according to the reports in the New York Times and the Washington Post, that Comey was refusing to publicly exonerate him. If it turns out that the reason that he chose to fire Jim Comey is that Jim Comey wouldn't publicly exonerate him, does that rise to the level of obstruction of justice?
Probably not. Trump could actually use that as a defense to an obstruction of justice prosecution. He would say, I don't respect the norms of my office. Firing James Comey was not good policy, so I'm a mean guy, but I'm not a criminal. I didn't obstruct justice. If, on the other hand, this letter reveals that his intent in firing Comey was to try to impede the investigation, which he was calling fake news, then that would be smoking gun evidence of obstruction of justice.
The other sort of interesting kind of aspect of these stories that we heard today, Paul, was this idea that Donald Trump had this letter that he wanted to originally send. That the White House counsel says, you know what, there's something problematic about that letter. We don't know what was problematic about it. But then Donald Trump then turns around and relies on a memo from Rod Rosenstein, the deputy attorney general, and uses that as a pretext to fire Jim Comey. I'm wondering what kind of a position does that put Rod Rosenstein in, because that sounds like he's both still the acting AG or the person in charge of the investigation and potentially a witness.
Yeah, he's a fact witness. This investigation is centering on why James Comey was fired, so Rosenstein will have to recuse himself at some point. We also have to note, Joy, that James Comey in this matter is no choir boy. He talks too much. That's a man trained in a law enforcement agent, so he should never have told James Comey that James Comey should never have told Donald Trump that he wasn't a subject of the investigation. That's an inappropriate conversation between the FBI director and the president. So there may very well have been a good reason to fire James Comey, but that may not have been the reason that Trump used to fire him.
What's interesting is you have Donald Trump today, and this is sort of after some communications with Chuck Grassley, one of the Republicans on the Judiciary Committee. Then he tweets out today sort of another accusation of Jim Comey, essentially saying, well, he cleared Hillary Clinton at the wrong time in the investigation, sort of re-racking this Hillary Clinton-based pretext for him being fired. This is getting very muddled, right? You have Donald Trump saying he had Russia on his mind, but then going back to this idea that there was something about the way Comey handled Clinton that got him fired. At this point, is it so muddled that you can anticipate Mueller being able to disentangle it?
Absolutely. So this is a classic move by Trump to try to deflect and obfuscate and point the blame someplace else. But Special Agent Mueller has this ace team of some of the nation's best prosecutors and law enforcement agents. We talked yesterday about how he now has CI from the tax division, people who really know how to make a case. So I don't think that they're going to be susceptible to Trump trying to change the subject. They're focused on collusion and obstruction of justice.
And do you expect Don McGahn to wind up being somebody that Mueller might want to talk to as well, because he's the one who knows what his letter says?
I'm sure he wants to, but he's the White House counsel, so there's attorney-client privilege. If Mueller thinks that the White House counsel is somehow implicated in a crime, then he'd be able to talk to him. A privilege wouldn't apply. But so far, we haven't heard that. So as much as he'd love to talk to the White House counsel, I don't think he's going to be able to do that.
All right. Well, Paul Butler, former federal prosecutor, MSNBC legal analyst, thank you very much. Always great to talk to you.
Great to be here.
All right. And all week, one Texas reporter has been asking what exactly is in this chemical plant northeast of Houston. That question has never been more urgent than tonight, when that plant was engulfed in flames. And that reporter joins us next with the latest on what he has discovered. Stay with us. chemical plant in Crosby, Texas last night. The plant has been without power for days, submerged under floodwaters from Hurricane Harvey. And as the organic peroxides that they produce have lost refrigeration, those chemicals have begun heating up and igniting. This was the fire yesterday after one container exploded. That fire eventually burned itself out. But Arkema executives warned that there were 8 more containers of those peroxides on the site. The plant had about 500,000 pounds of the stuff, and the company said that there was nothing to be done but wait for those 8 other containers to ignite as well. This is that chemical plant as of this evening. The company says 2 more containers have gone up in flames. And as you can see, the flames and that black plume of smoke are just massive. There are 6 more to go. Residents remain evacuated for 1.5 miles around the plant. State and company officials have been saying that the smoke is noxious and that people should avoid it. They insist that it's not seriously dangerous. That said, we still don't know exactly what's inside the plant because neither Arkema nor the state of Texas will release a detailed inventory of the chemicals there. And joining us now by phone is Matt Dempsey, data reporter on the Houston Chronicle's investigative team, and he's been writing about the dangers of Texas's chemical plants and has been pressing Arkema executives for information about exactly what chemicals are in that plant. Matt, thanks for joining us. And do you know any more tonight about what's in the chemical mixture that's spewing into the air out of that plant than you did last night?
No, we don't. Well, it's the same situation. In fact, the only thing we know for sure is that Arkema is refusing to provide the information. They backtracked from a promise they made yesterday at a press conference to me, and so now we're stuck essentially with, you know, that there are organic peroxides. I have some idea from an older tier 2, older chemical inventory. The public should be safe from the fumes and smoke of the fire as long as they're not within 1.5 miles of the facility where the evacuation zone is. But there's still a lot of other stuff on that site, and the concern for a lot of people is what happens if something happens to those things.
Well, that's the other thing, is that you still have more fires to burn if all of those plants have not exploded yet. I'm wondering, you know, at some point, is there not a public safety consideration that gives the people who live and work around that Arkema plant the legal right to know what is in those plumes of smoke? It's kind of shocking, I think, for the rest of the country that they'd have no right to know.
Right. I mean, in fact, the CEO of the company said that the reason they decided not to provide the tier 2, the chemical inventory, was that they were balancing the need of the public to know and the need for the public to be safe. And what he means, I know that sounds insane, considering what's going on, but what he would mean by that is the threat of terrorism. The terrorism threat is the reason why all these chemical inventories have been blocked in the state of Texas. So when you say the public safety threat, I completely agree with you. I think a lot of people agree with you. The state of Texas has ruled that that is not the case, that the threat of terrorism is more dangerous than something like this, or something like we said in our series. You know, there's a major chemical event that happens in Houston every 6 weeks. You know, there's very, like, maybe 2 instances ever of anything even remotely related to terrorism with chemical facilities in the United States.
Yep. Wow, pretty incredible. Matt Dempsey of the Houston Chronicle. Thank you, man. Thank you for keeping us updated on this. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me on again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Much more to come. Stay with us. Tonight, millions of Americans, immigrants, and their families and friends are on pins and needles waiting to hear if the President of the United States will drive a spike through the heart of DACA. Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals is, of course, the program that coaxed nearly 800,000 undocumented immigrants out of the shadows, people who were brought to this country as children. For many of them, America is the only home they've ever known. They and their families now face what amounts to a DACA death watch. The White House claims that they will announce DACA's fate on Tuesday. We shall see. But if you're wondering why this is all happening now, here is why. Because right now, September 5th is, at least metaphorically, circled in red on the president's calendar. An arbitrary, plucked-out-of-nowhere deadline given to the White House by these guys. 10 Republican state attorneys general and 1 governor who have formed a kind of anti-dreamers SWAT team. They've said basically pull the plug on DACA or else. In June, they fired off this letter in which they call DACA, quote, unlawful and respectfully request that it be phased out. Well, at least they asked respectfully. Of course, they went on to say that if the president doesn't go along with their respectful request by September 5th, they'll sue. That was in June. But tonight, with that deadline just days away, there is an 11th hour curveball. Tonight, one of those 10 Republican state attorneys general plus one governor, one of them has switched teams. Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery III. This afternoon, Attorney General Slattery had a sudden change of heart, and he's now bailing on his Republican comrades in their threat to sue over DACA. Writing, quote, "There is a human element to this that is not lost on me and should not be ignored." He went on to say, quote, "Many of the DACA recipients, some of whose records I reviewed, have outstanding accomplishments and laudable ambitions, which, if achieved, will be of great benefit and service to our country." Huh. Kind of makes you wonder what got him to see the light. Well, here's one possible explanation. Protesters gathered in Nashville earlier this month with a message for Vice President Pence, who was there for a GOP fundraiser, demanding that he defend DACA. There has been no let-up in Tennessee. Last month, DACA supporters marched in Chattanooga. Last week, they held a letter-writing campaign in Johnson City. Concerned citizens and undocumented immigrants have been keeping the pressure on. So as we head into the Labor Day weekend with DACA's future uncertain, remember what we saw today in Tennessee. Pressure works. Joining us now is Grayson Martinez, Advocacy Director at the United We Dream Network. Ms. Martinez, thank you for joining us tonight. So talk a little bit about the resources and expertise being tapped by Robert Mueller as his work proceeds. We're also keeping an eye on a developing story. Reports that at any moment, the president could end the Obama-era policy, allowing dreamers brought to the U.S. as children to stay here legally. And we're also watching what's happening on the ground in Texas. Overnight, there were those two explosions at the Arkema chemical plant outside Houston.
I would like to know what they discovered in that meeting, and I would like the transcript released so we can do that.
The answer is, it takes a vote of the committee to do it, but I presume that they will be used.
And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. Big show tonight. There's a lot going on. We are keeping an eye out tonight on whether the president might make an extraordinary and early use of the pardon power to pardon convicted former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio tonight. We've been getting mixed messages on that. The White House saying today that we don't expect an announcement about that soon, but we're also told that the paperwork has been prepared already and the talking points have been distributed to White House surrogates in terms of how they should talk about that when it happens. So the White House doesn't always speak officially for the president in terms of when he's going to do something and what. So we've got eyes on that tonight. That would obviously be a major national controversy if the president decides to do that. We've also got news tonight about a corruption scandal having to do with the new administration that may be getting pursued now by an unlikely investigator. This is a very interesting story. We've got that coming up exclusively tonight. We've got that just in a couple minutes. And we also got a couple of, a pair of national security stories tonight, one of which may raise your spirits in a way, and one which probably will flip your stomach over several times. So there's a lot going on. But I want to start with something different. Before we get to that news tonight, I want to start with something a little off the path. Something that, as far as I can tell, is basically an open question. And that is how I am raising it here on the air tonight. I want to basically explain this thing that we as a country have all been able to figure out recently, within the last couple of days, because of good new investigative reporting that's been done by the New York Times. And the reason I want to talk about this part of it here is basically to plant a flag on this point, to clarify this thing that we've just learned, basically to raise a flag as to whether the open question, I think, that is now raised can be answered. So I admit this is a little bit weird, but bear with me. I think it is worth it. All right. Here's the story. A few years ago, a very wealthy Russian lawmaker, a billionaire, who was a Russian lawmaker, he fled his country He left Russia and he came to the United States because he said he feared for his life. He said a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, a Russian oligarch very close to Putin, had confiscated billions of dollars from him. And when he sued that oligarch to get back his billions of dollars, the backlash was swift and scary. He says he was stripped of his immunity as a member of parliament. He was then charged with fraud, what he says were trumped up fraud charges. He says he was then quickly put on Russia's most wanted list. He said he was fearing for his life when he fled to the United States. And he started looking into the possibility of trying to get asylum here in the United States. He also continued to press his legal case against the Putin-linked oligarch who he claimed had stolen all those billions of dollars from him. And you know, if you've got enough juice and enough connections to steal billions of dollars from someone in Russia, naturally you don't take kindly to somebody pursuing you in court for that. So the Putin-connected oligarch who's accused of stealing billions of dollars from this Russian lawmaker, the oligarch got to work doing everything he could to mess with this guy who he'd supposedly stolen all this money from, to mess with this fugitive Russian lawmaker who was pressing this legal case against him. Including, he mounted a campaign, a multifaceted campaign, to try to block that fugitive lawmaker guy from getting asylum in the United States. And in order to accomplish that objective, he hired a very special kind of DC operative. He hired a naturalized U.S. citizen, originally from Russia, a guy with, we now know, extensive ties to Russian intelligence. And he was well known for being an effective pro-Putin, pro-Kremlin fixer and lobbyist in Washington, D.C. That Russian-born D.C. fixer was hired to run basically a smear campaign against the Russian lawmaker who fled to the United States. This fixer guy got hired to do the work. He did the work. When it came time to get paid for the work, the fixer guy later admitted in court that the way he got paid for this job was that he was handed bags of $100 bills, $70,000 or $80,000 at a time, in a bag. Nice work if you can get it. Now, around the same time, the fugitive Russian lawmaker is both trying to get asylum in the United States. He's trying to defend himself from this cash money smear campaign that's being paid for by the guy who he says stole all his money back in Russia. And he's still pursuing his legal case against that guy to try to get all his money back. And around the time that this smear campaign was starting up against him, led by this Russian-born DC fixer guy, his lawyers, who were working on his original case against the oligarch guy, their computers got hacked. The lawyers are based in London. They were sent suspicious emails that contained spyware, malware, that was meant to infiltrate their computers. Luckily, the infection emails looked suspicious enough to the lawyers that they called in help and they took steps to protect themselves. They tried first to find out who had come after them in that way. They wanted to find out who had tried to infect their email and access their servers to steal documents. So they hired forensic experts who came in and did something I didn't really realize you could do, but apparently you can. The forensic experts they hired basically activated the malware that had been sent to these lawyers, but then they fed traceable documents into the spyware. It would be like if you were able to put a GPS tracker on your stolen car, so you could follow your stolen car to the chop shop where they were going to cut it up for parts, right? Then you could not just bust the thieves who stole your car, you could bust the whole car thieving operation. So they put these traceable documents on the lawyers' computers, then they traced them as the malware in the lawyers' computers stole the documents, and when those traceable documents were opened up, the forensic experts could see where they were. And wouldn't you know it, where those documents got opened was on computers at the company of the Putin-connected oligarch who these lawyers were pursuing in court, and who was funding that smear campaign against their client back in the United States. So that was 2011. Interesting case. Then it happened again. A couple of years later, that Russian-born, Kremlin-friendly DC fixer with ties to Russian intelligence, the guy who ran the smear campaign for the Russian oligarch that apparently included this sophisticated hacking and stealing operation on the guy's lawyers' computers, that same fixer guy in DC turned up working for another Russian oligarch close to Vladimir Putin. This was in 2013. This new oligarch connected to Putin, he owned a mining company that was headquartered in Europe. And he hired the Russian-born DC fixer guy to go after a rival company in his industry. He hired the fixer guy to go after a mining company called IMR, which is headquartered in Switzerland. And sure enough, they got hacked too, badly. This time it worked. The company's internal documents got hacked. They got stolen off the company's servers, and then they turned up leaked far and wide to try to cause maximum damage to IMR. Now, IMR did fight back. They sued the company of this Putin-connected Russian oligarch who they were up against in this business dispute. They sued his company, and they also sued the Russian-born DC fixer guy, who the oligarch had hired to manage his dispute with IMR. They sued them. They sued them for computer espionage. An investigator working for the Swiss mining company for IMR testified in court that he followed the DC fixer guy to a coffee shop in London while he was investigating this computer espionage. He says he saw the DC fixer guy sit down with a person who appeared to be his client in this matter involving IMR. The investigator testified that he actually heard the fixer guy in that coffee shop explain to his client that his team had successfully hacked into the computers at IMR. The investigator testified that he then saw the DC fixer guy hand over a thumb drive at the coffee shop that he said, the thumb drive he said that contained the documents that had been stolen from IMR. The documents that ended up getting leaked all over the place to try to hurt IMR's business standing in this dispute with the Russian oligarch who had hired the fixer. Okay, so both of those hacking cases had been previously reported. They were interesting, like, business crime stories, right? But this week, the New York Times figured out that there's a crucial link between both of those hacking stories. That fixer guy, this DC fixer, the Soviet-born DC fixer with extensive Russian intelligence ties, in both of these instances, he was the guy hired by Putin-connected oligarchs for both of these campaigns. And in both of these campaigns, opponents of the oligarchs who were paying him found themselves subjected to sophisticated hacking attacks designed to break into their computers, steal documents off their computer servers, and then use those documents against them in these disputes. The fixer guy in DC is in the middle of both of those cases. And the MO looks very much the same in both of those cases. And his name is Rinat Akhmetshin. And if that name is familiar, it's because we now know that he was one of the people who went to that now famous meeting at Trump Tower last June with Donald Trump Jr. and Jared Kushner and the Trump campaign chair, Paul Manafort, and a Kremlin-connected lawyer who had been sold to the Trump campaign as someone who could deliver damaging information from the Russian government about Hillary Clinton. Now, what was Rinat Akhmetshin doing at that meeting? Rinat Akhmetshin's explanation for what he was doing at that meeting, all these weeks later, is still funny. He maintains that he just happened to be having lunch that day with the Kremlin-connected lawyer, and she spontaneously, like almost as a lark, invited him to come along. And so he went, having no idea where he was going or why. He doesn't even live in New York. But miraculously, there he was, having a BLT or whatever, minding his own business, when whoops, he ends up invited into a meeting starting right then inside the executive suite at Trump Tower with the president's son and the president's son-in-law and the guy who's running the Trump for President campaign. Hey, Rinat, why don't you come along? More the merrier, it'll be fun. Have you met these guys? So no, we don't have any idea what he was really doing there, but we do know more now about his particular expertise, what he appears to be good at, what kind of services he has been able to offer the people who he has worked for over the years. I mean, there's no reason to think that Rinat Akhmetshin is the actual hacker. He's not the Cheeto-eating drone at a computer terminal in St. Petersburg who's figuring out the code, right, for the malware. No, I mean, what we know he does, or what he appears to have done in the past for his clients, is that he's the guy who makes arrangements about this stuff. He's the guy who makes arrangements for targeted hacking to happen, and for the material obtained by targeted hacking to be used to maximum benefit for his clients. He's apparently the one who arranges the hack and then weaponizes whatever is stolen in the hack. Who knows who his team is who he has doing these hacks? What the Time has also now added to our understanding of this part of the case is all the different ways in which Rinat Akhmetshin appears to be connected to Russian intelligence. When the deputy head of Russian intelligence had to come to Washington to do a dog and pony show a few years ago about some joint U.S.-Russian policy effort, the guy who shepherded him around Washington and went to all his events with him was our friend, the D.C. fixer, Rinat Akhmetshin, deputy head of Russian intelligence. Americans who came across him during his work in D.C. over the years say he openly alluded to his own past involvement with Russian intelligence. Quote, he did not make it a secret. Over the years, he told journalists quite openly that he had worked with Russian military counterintelligence. A member of the National Security Council under George W. Bush says he came across Rinat Akhmetshin frequently in Washington, D.C. He tells the Times, quote, he would boast about his ties and experience in Soviet intelligence and counterintelligence. And, of course, there's the fact that he ran operation after operation for oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin, who hired him to manage their business and financial disputes with people who soon found themselves subject to hacking attacks designed to infiltrate their computers and steal their stuff. So their stuff could be used against them in those disputes. Does this sound familiar? So that guy turns up at that Trump Tower meeting, just passing by. But that meeting on June 9th of last year, there's a couple of things that are very interesting about it. Number one, and I don't know how to explain this at all, but that meeting ended up being very closely held. There were a lot of people in that meeting. There were a lot of Russians in that meeting, and there was a Trump, a Kushner, and a Manafort in that meeting too. It was a big meeting involving a lot of people, but it was quite closely held. Not many people knew about it for a long time. We have reason to believe that Special Counsel Robert Mueller and his team of investigators, they don't appear to have figured out about that meeting on their own. All indications are that Robert Mueller's team only started looking into that Trump Tower meeting and what happened there after it was reported in the New York Times. How come they didn't know about it? Also, former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, with everything he figured out for the Trump-Russia dossier that's now back at the center of the scandal, in his reporting, his dossier that he created for Fusion GPS, he never mentioned the Trump Tower meeting. It's not in the dossier. He seems to have figured out a lot of other stuff. We also now know, so that's interesting, that it seems to have stayed under the radar for so long, which is unusual given the number of people in that meeting and who they were. But we also now know that by the time that meeting happened on June 9th, the DNC, the Democratic Party, and the Clinton campaign had already been hacked by Russian hackers. And so now, if you put the timeline back together with what we know now, you can now see that once the Democrats had had their servers hacked and all their documents stolen, that's when the senior leadership of the Trump campaign took this meeting with a guy who has extensive known experience in exactly that kind of hacking. This guy who has years of experience in arranging the stealing of and weaponizing of hacked information for Russian political purposes. The day after the Trump Tower meeting, the weekend of June 10th and 11th, that's when the DNC and their IT consultants finally kicked out the Russian hackers that had been rooting around in their system for months. We still don't know exactly why they did it at that specific moment, except we know that at the time they were preparing to go public with what had happened to them. And indeed, the following week, it went public. That's when we all learned for the first time that the Russians had hacked the DNC servers. We learned that the following week when the Washington Post reported on it. The day after that story broke, the Russians started leaking some of what they had hacked out of the DNC through Guccifer 2.0 and then DC leaks. And then the full weaponization of that hacked information started the following month, in July, with the WikiLeaks stuff, timed perfectly and expertly to coincide with the start of the Democratic National Convention. Now we know that about who was in that meeting, and now we know what we know about that time. So here's my question. Now that we know more about who was in the room with the Trump campaign, in that interim period between when the Democratic Party was hacked and when the Russians started turning the product of that hack back at the U.S. election and the U.S. media to help Trump and hurt Clinton, now that we know that a Russia-born DC fixer who apparently specialized in that kind of work was meeting with the upper echelons of the Trump campaign right then, how can we tell if there's a connection? Is there a connection between this operative being at that Trump Tower meeting, that specific expertise under his belt? Is there a connection between that and the Russian attack on the DNC and the Clinton campaign, and how the documents hacked out of the Clinton campaign and the DNC got repurposed into the campaign to hurt Hillary Clinton? Does Rinat Akhmetshin's proximity to these previous hacking cases map technically with what happened at the DNC last year in terms of timing, in terms of tactics, in terms of just the way that operation ran? Is it the same fingerprints on all three? Because we're pretty sure that he's associated with the first two. And we know about the third one, and it really looks the same. Are the fingerprints the same on all three? Rinat Akhmetshin would not answer our questions when we reached out to him for this story. But you know what? All of this should be answerable. And certainly by trained investigators, but I'm guessing even in open source research and journalistic work here. So there's a whole bunch of news to get to tonight, and we're going to get to it now. But just stick a pin in this story, in that meeting, in that time frame, specifically into that guy. Who's going to be the first to figure this part out?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Hey, what the hell? Let me look for it again.
The Russian military intelligence unit that carried out the DNC hack, that group is nicknamed Fancy Bear. And they're apparently still working now, this summer, still against us, the American public. On behalf of Donald Trump,
fancy.
Right after we learned last month about the Trump Tower meeting between Donald Trump's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr., and his campaign chair Paul Manafort, and his son-in-law Jared Kushner, along with all those various Russians who were promising Russian government dirt on Hillary Clinton, right after we learned about that Trump Tower meeting, you might remember that the Trump White House launched kind of a PR counteroffensive to try to blunt the impact of that news. And a little bit of it was defense. They tried to excuse the meeting, dismiss it as no big deal. Remember, they kind of argued that, oh, anybody would have taken that meeting. It's common political practice. Everybody always takes OPPO research on their political enemies from Putin. Who among us doesn't tap the Russian government whenever we need dirt on a fellow American? They did mount a little bit of a defense, but the Trump White House hates playing defense as much as anybody in politics. And so, alongside that kind of sad defense, they also simultaneously launched a counter-offensive in which they claimed actually that the real scandal, the real foreign collusion, was done by Hillary Clinton. It was the Hillary Clinton campaign that colluded with a foreign power. I'm rubber, you're glue. White House officials, Russian legal team, multiple shows on the Fox News channel, the White House spokesperson speaking from the briefing room, they all started echoing this same counterclaim that there was no collusion scandal involving the Trump campaign in Russia. The real scandal was Hillary Clinton colluding with a whole different country.
There are no Russians in America.
Offense against what the president calls a, quote, disgraceful double standard. Team Trump pointing out that Democrats' own alleged coordination happened with foreign governments. Watch this.
I do know for a fact that Democratic Party operatives went to the Ukrainian embassy to
Did he say Democratic Party?
Research and attacks against our campaign. So that's a story.
The double standard is upsetting. I mean, you see it every day. I'd love to rave and rave.
A man named Brady.
Everything that's going on. I think that people see it. Does anybody say, by the way, why did the DNC have
Why did the DNC?
He's actually getting information. Why is that not one standard and this is another?
Break it down.
Break it down. The backstory on the DNC's alleged ties to the Ukraine.
Live in Washington. That was Fox News Channel on July 12th. And that That on July 12th, that started like 5 straight days on the Fox News channel of them hyping this story, that the real collusion was Hillary Clinton's collusion. But you know, that day, July 12th, a website called Cyber Berkeley.
Will the real fat traitor please stand up?
Started posting what they said were stolen Hillary Clinton emails that proved this story, that bolstered this story, that the Clinton campaign and Ukraine secretly colluded and worked together during the election. Cyber Berkut posted that stuff, those supposed stolen emails from the Clinton campaign, on July 12th, which is when Fox News started going nuts on this stuff. Cyber Berkut is believed by experts to be the Russian government. They are believed to be the latest online alter ego of Fancy Bear, the Russian military intelligence unit that hacked the DNC in the first place, that took all those Democratic Party stolen documents they obtained by hacking and then fed them back into the U.S. political system, into the U.S. media, in a way that was designed to help Donald Trump and hurt Democrats. That's what they did during the election. They apparently are still at it. This summer, they're still feeding anti-Democratic, anti-Hillary Clinton storylines cold from materials that they hacked from the Clinton campaign and the DNC. They're feeding them back into what isn't a campaign anymore, but it's still a U.S. political system and a U.S. conservative media universe that will do all they can to help the Trump administration, apparently no matter the source of their information. Now, it's interesting. Fox News really started pushing this stuff on July 12th, the day that this Front for Russian Military Intelligence started putting out its own data to support this story. The White House actually started pushing it 2 days before that. Out of the blue, the White House resurrected these old claims that hadn't been circulating anywhere for months about Hillary Clinton being the real colluder, the real collusion being Clinton and Ukraine. The White House started that on the 10th of July. They were like the on-ramp. And within 2 days, this Russian military intelligence unit was feeding that stream of information with stolen emails. Then Fox News and other conservative media outlets picked it up and ran with it, and now your conservative uncle, who types with a caps lock key on and forwards you stuff from Breitbart and watches Fox News all day, he believes that there are 2 collusion scandals, if there are any. And the one where we've got the real proof is the one with Hillary Clinton. This presidency right now is in a rocky period. For a lot of reasons, most of them all of them self-imposed. But nobody's quitting the administration. Nobody's resigning. Nobody in active Republican politics is calling on the president to resign or anything that dramatic. The continuing existential threat to this presidency remains the special counsel investigation into the Russia issue led by Robert Mueller. And today there are both intriguing and strange signs that there may be stuff going on inside that inquiry that we don't understand and that may not be a good sign for that inquiry. And we've got a fresh look at how the Russian attack that started this whole crisis and that started this whole investigation, it continues to operate on Donald Trump's behalf, and with crucial amplification from the White House itself and from the conservative media universe that supports it. It's not over. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
starting off the show by dropping my pencil. Let's not take that as a moment about how things are going to go. Although, you never know, physical comedy can make for very interesting news sometimes. Let's start that again. Ready? Hello. Happy Tuesday. Thanks for being with us this hour. All right. For a while on Twitter, for a couple of years at least on Twitter, if you sent a tweet that included the word socialist, or that included the word socialism, or communist, or communism, if you put that word in any tweet, you would get an immediate reply from what looked like the Twitter account of the late Senator Joseph McCarthy. You see the response there? Not the initial tweet, right? The first tweet is somebody writing communism defined, but then see the response there? And you see the little avatar? That's Joe McCarthy's face.
We can go ahead and compile these meta
there on the Twitter account. If you tweeted anything that said socialism or communism or socialist or communist, that Joe McCarthy Beyond the Grave Twitter account would tweet back at you. And it would tweet at you something like this: creeping socialism. Or it would say, communist infiltrated. He was also good at terrible puns. He would say, for example, on your marks. Or, this one's pretty good. Quit stalling. That Twitter account was, of course, not actually Senator Joe McCarthy tweeting from Beyond the Grave. Instead, it was Robot J. McCarthy. It was a bot. It was a Twitter bot. There wasn't, in fact, a person somewhere who was reading every Twitter message sent around the world, looking for the word communism or communist, and then writing back with the quit Stalin pun. There wasn't a person who was doing that. It was an automated thing. It was a robot, an automated account that was programmed to notice any Twitter mentions of socialism or communism. And then it would automatically spit out one of these funny pre-programmed Joe McCarthy nonsense tweets in response. Creeping socialism. It was funny. It was harmless. It was all in good fun. And sadly now, Robot J. McCarthy is defunct. It's not around anymore. But seeing that bot in action, seeing the fake Joe McCarthy instant response to anything that includes one of those words, that was the first time I really understood how people could automate social media stuff. How you could program what appeared to be a human online, that wasn't really a human, to do stuff that ordinary humans didn't have the capacity to do, right? No individual human could notice and respond to every single mention of the word socialism on all of Twitter, but a computer program could, tirelessly, forever, ubiquitously, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? Hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of times, millions of times, why not? And Robot J. McCarthy, that was a funny way to do it. But you can see how that bot technology could be used in a less fun way, in a less funny, less harmless way. Like, say, during an election season. You can see how people relatively easily could program bots to not just make jokes, but to latch onto and respond to and get themselves involved in, for example, any Twitter conversation that mentioned Hillary Clinton. Recognize a pro-Hillary Clinton message or a pro-Hillary Clinton hashtag or even just the name Hillary or the name Clinton, and then
or a pro-Hillary Clinton YouTube channel that may or may not stutter.
With lots and lots of pro-Donald Trump commentary. Just flood the zone with enough of that stuff, and pretty soon nobody can really have a conversation online about Hillary Clinton at all. If you do that enough, if you get enough bots working that beat, you end up drowning out what would otherwise be normal communication, normal commentary, normal discussion, or even normal political organizing. You end up drowning it out in misinformation and noise and
And let me just say clearly right there, that alone means that that election was not free and fair, period.
and just the sheer amount of traffic. And when that noise bomb that comes back at you online is not just loud, it's outrageous, it's profane, it's stuffed with unexpected bits of porn, it's relentless in the number of posts that appear back at you and how long they keep going for. Well, in that circumstance, you'd think twice about trying to raise that subject online ever again, right? It makes discussion of the things you care about online. If you were a Hillary Clinton supporter, it makes discussion of Hillary Clinton online feel futile. It feels ugly and weird in terms of the response that you get. So ultimately, over time, you tune out, you shut down.
Y'all know what that's like, right?
And if you use Twitter, even casually, and if you have an interest in politics, if you used Twitter during the election year, you undoubtedly had a little bit of that experience, or at least observed it. It was ubiquitous. Right after the election, in November, researchers at Oxford University published a study of nearly 20 million tweets about the election that were sent over the last week of the presidential contest. And those researchers at Oxford determined that out of all the traffic on Twitter about the U.S. election during that time, bots produced nearly 20% of it. During the debates, over a quarter of all election-related Twitter traffic came from these malicious bots. And the bot traffic was almost entirely pro-Donald Trump. And some of that dynamic was visible at the time. But now, we are starting to be able to put it together in terms of how Russia used that particular weapon to basically eat American political discourse during our election, or at least eat or render useless a big portion of it. And now that the FBI has confirmed that the Trump campaign is the subject of a counterintelligence investigation concerning them possibly cooperating with Russia during Russia's attack on our election, now we can put it together in terms of the timeline here. Right? As we get closer to answering the question of whether or not Russia had help, whether they had confederates inside the Trump campaign when they launched this attack, the timeline is getting really clear now and really interesting in terms of finally getting this thing understood. And you don't have to go back very far, just go back 1 year. As we reported last night, in February of last year, a senior aide to Russian President Vladimir Putin gave a presentation at a Moscow Information Security Forum in which he promised that in this open source forum, he promised that the Russian military and intelligence services had developed what they considered to be the equivalent, the strategic equivalent of a nuclear bomb, but for information warfare. This is a speech that was first reported by David Ignatius at the Washington Post. He got the speech translated from Russian. It's Vladimir Putin's cyber war senior advisor telling his audience in Moscow last February, quote, "You think we are living in 2016. No, we are living in 1948. And do you know why? Because in 1949, the Soviet Union had its first atomic bomb test. And if until that moment the Americans were not taking us seriously, in 1949, everything changed. And they started talking to us on an equal footing. I'm warning you," he said, "we are on the verge of having something in the information arena that will allow us to talk to the Americans as equals." So, the Kremlin bragging last year about how they had a new nuclear-level information warfare capability that they were about to deploy against the United States, something that would bring America down, make America recognize Russia's strength, make us see them as our equal. That was February of last year. Then in March, we know from the intelligence community's report on Russia's attack, in March, Russian military intelligence indeed started their attack. Quote, "The GRU, which is Russian military intelligence, the GRU probably began cyber operations aimed at the U.S. election by March 2016. We assess," and this is the U.S. intelligence report on what Russia did, "we assess that the GRU operations resulted in the compromise of the personal email accounts of Democratic Party officials and political figures. By May, the GRU had exfiltrated large volumes of data from the DNC." So again, simple timeline here, right? February, Kremlin basically says, watch this. Watch what we're about to do here. This is going to be epic, what we're going to do to the United States. That's in February. Following month, in March, their military intelligence directorate attacks and starts stealing all this proprietary political information from the Democratic Party. And ultimately, by June and July, we know that the Russians had shown their hand, that was not just an intelligence operation. They were not just stealing information from the Democratic Party so they could get American secrets, so they could get secret American information and use it within their own government for their own purposes. No, by June and July, they showed what they actually wanted to do with that information was that they wanted to release it publicly in the United States. They wanted to weaponize it, release it back into our country in a way designed to inflict maximum harm on Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. That's what they did with DC leaks and Guccifer 2.0 and the secret stuff they stole from the DNC and from the Clinton campaign chairman, John Podesta. But now we can also tell you that they were also playing another card at the same time. And it's one that a lot of people watching this show right now experienced in real time, and you may not have known what it was when it happened to you. Jason Cherkis and Ryan Grimm, two reporters, Huffington Post, they've done some great work on this recently, and we've been able to add this to the timeline, in part because of what we've been able to figure out, but also because of what they've reported. So again, timeline here, February, Kremlin threatening / promising that they're going nuclear in their information war. March, their GRU attacks the Democratic Party and steals all their data. We see all the fruits of that by the summer. But that spring, April and May, the other thing that they started doing was a huge industrial-sized bot attack. This was not a joke. They used automated social media bots and what appeared to be paid operatives in Russia and other countries, specifically to target Bernie supporters. They took the real split in the Democratic Party between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, and they blew it up into what they hoped would be an unbreachable chasm. One of the administrators at a Bernie Sanders Facebook page in San Diego described it like this to Grimm and Cherkis at the Huffington Post, quote, people with no apparent ties to California were friending his San Diego Facebook page and sharing links from unfamiliar sites full of anti-Hillary Clinton propaganda. The stories they posted were not the normal complaints. These stories alleged that Hillary Clinton had murdered her political opponents and used body doubles. When John Mattis, the administrator on that Bernie site in San Diego, when John Mattis started tracking down the site's domain registrations, the trail led to places like Macedonia and Albania. And it wasn't just San Diego. By mid-May, an administrator of a Facebook site for Bernie Sanders supporters in California, Bay Area for Bernie, was setting off her own alert about many, if not all, of the Bernie groups being inundated, quote, with bogus users. At Sane Progressive, they were posting the same warning. At Bernie Sanders is my hero, the administrators there were posting their own version of the warning, basically saying, listen, something is happening here that is not native to our community. They were warning that these bogus postings were, quote, developed to be appealing to Berners, to Bernie Sanders supporters, but they were not from an American or Bernie supporting point of view. The real Bernie supporters in this country, the people who were, for example, running the Facebook pages in support of him by and large, they were trying to stop this when they realized what it was. We see the evidence of that now looking back at it. But even they seem to have realized that their sounding the alarm about this was pretty much futile. People just couldn't hear it. A few days before the election, John Mattis posted on his San Diego Bernie page, quote, to all that get news from this page, be advised that groups from Macedonia have infiltrated this page and other Bernie pages, planting fake hate stories about Hillary. Now, this has been previously reported, previously discussed around the campaign, as if that foreign influx of sort of noise and vitriol was all commercial traffic. People in foreign countries who didn't really care about the U.S. election, but they were writing all these fake news stories basically to troll for clicks, to get gullible U.S. politics junkies to click on those stories, just because they wanted the ad revenue they could get from people clicking on their stories, the ad revenue they could get from traffic they could drive to their site no matter what nonsense thing they posted. And certainly there's a commercial element to it. That is definitely some of it. But we now understand much more about how Russian intelligence piggybacks on commercial hacking and commercial trolling efforts. It's part of their MO. It's what Russian intelligence does, particularly Russian military intelligence. We also know that the Bernie administrators who went through this in real time, at least some of them don't believe that what they were going through, that what was washing over their Bernie supporter sites, they don't necessarily all believe that it was just people trying to make money off Bernie supporters. John Mattis telling us today, quote, I strongly believe this was not just a commercial venture. 13 million Bernie voters were out there to potentially support and vote for Hillary. Bernie voters were very engaged, contributed millions, and brought in countless new voters. If you could suppress those voters, you could provide yourself an advantage at low cost. And now, McClatchy reports that the bot traffic that we see now, we saw in real time without understanding what it was, and we see now clearly what it was in retrospect. McClatchy's now reporting that the bot attacks, the bot traffic, is part of the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into the Russian attack on the election and the question of whether or not there was Trump campaign cooperation in mounting that attack. Quoting from McClatchy, operatives for Russia appear to have strategically timed bots to blitz social media with links to pro-Trump stories at times when the billionaire businessman was on the defensive. Quote, the bots' end products were largely millions of Twitter and Facebook posts carrying links to stories on conservative internet sites such as Breitbart News and InfoWars, as well as Kremlin-backed media outlets like RT and Sputnik News. Federal investigators examining the bot attacks, according to McClatchy, they're exploring whether the far-right news operations took any actions to assist Russia's operatives. In other words, were they in on it? Quote, investigators examining the bot attacks are exploring whether the far-right news operations took any actions to assist Russia's operatives. The investigation of the bot-engineered traffic appears to be in its early stages, but it's being driven by the FBI's counterintelligence division. So if McClatchy's sources are correct, we now know that what appeared to be a mysterious tidal wave that turned social media into brainless anti-Clinton mush during the campaign, that was not only part of the Russian attack. It's part of the Russian attack that is being investigated by the FBI's counterintelligence division, including the possibility that there was some kind of cooperation or coordination in that part of the attack from pro-Trump forces inside the United States. We will have more on that ahead tonight, including one of the reporters that broke that story. But before we bring that reporter in, I just want to leave this on one last point that I think is worth keeping in mind. And when I describe this point, you are going to think that I'm getting into obscure and academic stuff. But you know what? At this point, I'm starting to feel like the obscure and academic stuff is sometimes where the real meat of this story is hiding in plain sight. Very little of this story has been broken by secret information. A lot of this story has been broken. A lot of this story has come into focus by just looking hard enough at what is out there in open sources. Okay, so here's one last point. As the FBI and congressional investigations and journalists continue to authenticate and flesh out just how much Russia did, just exactly what Russia did to us last year, and as we continue to get more information about contacts between Trump campaign people and the Russians during the time that the attack was underway, despite the fact that the Trump campaign denied it all these months. As those pieces are starting to fall into place, it really is worth looking at the way the Russians talk about this stuff themselves, because they are proud of their capability in this regard. They really did have a Putin senior advisor last February threaten in public that the United States was about to be humbled and brought down to an equal footing with Russia by a new offensive capability in information warfare that the Russian military was about to unleash against us. They really did do that. They got out in public and pounded their chest about it. Also, their equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff wrote a public manifesto on Russian military might that is now becoming cult reading in national security circles and among journalists who are trying to figure out this story. He published it in 2013. He says Russia would henceforth use non-military tactics, chiefly information warfare tactics, at a 4-to-1 ratio to its military tactics in its wars. When they went to war from here on out, they would wage 4 times as much information war as actual kinetic hot shooting war. And in the Russian military's preeminent journal, which is called Military Thought, in 2014, in a seminal article titled Information Operations on the Battlefield, in that article in 2014, Russian military bragged that if information warfare is going to work, it, quote, must be conducted constantly, in peacetime, in the period of threats, and in wartime. If you're going to use information warfare to confuse, demoralize, divide, distract, and ultimately defeat a rival country, according to the Russians' military doctrine on this subject, you do not just do it in wartime. You have to do it all the time or it doesn't work. And Huffington Post did their dive into how Bernie supporters online got targeted in this Russian attack. They focused in part on a Bernie Sanders Facebook page called Bernie Sanders Lovers, which says it is based in Burlington, Vermont. It is not based in Burlington, Vermont. It's based in Albania. And nobody who's not from Albania appears to have anything to do with that Bernie Sanders site. But the important thing here is that Bernie Sanders Lovers page run out of Albania, it's still there, still running, still operating, still churning this stuff out. Now, this is not part of American politics. This is not, partisan warfare between Republicans and Democrats. This is international warfare against our country. And it did not end on Election Day. We are still in it. There's a reason why the investigation here, the counterintelligence investigation here, is something about which there is some urgency. We've got more on the new aspect of it that we just learned about today coming up.
Or he may, just me, baby.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
As with any counterintelligence investigation, this will also include an assessment of whether any crimes were committed.
Whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. That statement by the FBI director today, obviously very carefully couched. By the time he said it, it could not have counted as a total surprise. But it is still shocking. This is a historic thing. As USA Today, Susan Page at USA Today put it.
I apologize for the obscuring of the MSNBC logo. I was watching The Matrix with my wife last night, and you gotta zoom in so it fills the whole TV.
This afternoon, quote, not since the Watergate scandal that forced President Richard Nixon to resign more than a half century ago has there been an official investigation of such potential consequence. At moments this big, it also sometimes helps to get outside our news environment and kind of look in on it from beyond our shores. Toward that end, the left-leaning Guardian newspaper in Britain sort of nutted up the moment nicely today. They said, quote, Comey's appearance, flanked by the NSA director, marked a remarkable and unprecedented threshold in U.S. political history, putting beyond doubt that a sitting president's entourage was under investigation for possible conniving with a foreign adversary to put that president in power. The hearing today was at times incisive. At times it was lame and embarrassingly partisan. Sorry. My favorite moment was when the Republican chairman of the committee demanded that Hillary Clinton must be investigated for Donald Trump's ties to the Russians. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, just a reflex. Lock her up. But, despite low moments like that, not everything was partisan, and we did learn some concrete new information. We have confirmed now that the FBI has an ongoing counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign and whether or not the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia while Russia was attacking the United States. We know that investigation started in late July last year. We know from some very pointed questioning from the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff is going to be here in just a moment. We know from his questioning of Director Comey that one of the things we reported on Friday night is borne out by the FBI's investigations. We did this special report on Friday night where we talked to the guy who was in charge of these matters in real time at the Clinton campaign when the attack was happening. And we reported on Friday night that it was the Clinton campaign's perception at the time that the initial dump of Democratic Party documents that were stolen by the Russians, it was their perception that was sort of inexpertly and ham-handedly released and handled by the Russians themselves. The second release of documents, though, the one that was through WikiLeaks, was much slicker and appeared to have been handled through some sort of intermediary, some sort of third party who sharpened its political impact, both in terms of its timing and its presentation, its user-friendliness. That was, as we reported Friday night, suspected by the Clinton campaign at the time. The FBI director confirmed today that, in fact, the initial release of documents that the Russians hacked and stole and released through Guccifer and DC leaks, the FBI director today confirmed that was a Russian operation directly. He confirmed today that the second wave, the WikiLeaks dumps, according to Director Comey, he says those were done through what he called a cutout, some sort of intermediary. So what we are beginning to understand about how this happened, the FBI is confirming that's the way it happened. In general, I think it is fair to say that the Republican members of the committee contributed less to the investigatory nature of what happened today in this public hearing, but it is also worth noting one exception to that rule. Ileana Ros-Lehtinen is a moderate Republican from Florida. She did not go down the other roads, investigate Hillary Clinton. She didn't go down those other roads with the other Republicans. She was a very independent voice today. She asked her own variety of direct, probing questions with most of the time that she had, and her questioning elucidated another one of the concrete new things that we learned today, or at least that we had confirmed today by the FBI and the NSA. And it's something that really makes sense. If Russia wanted not just to affect the outcome of our elections, they wanted this to be a show of force. They wanted this to be, the test of an atomic bomb. They wanted this to be a display of their capability that would threaten the United States, hurt the United States, humble the United States, and make us see them as equals. Right? They didn't want anybody else to get credit for this work. They didn't particularly want to cover their tracks here. They did this. One of the things we had confirmed today by the FBI and the NSA director is that the Russians did this in as loud a way as possible when it came to the actual tactics of how they mounted the attack.
Why do you think that they did not mind being loud and being found out?
I don't know the answer for sure. I think their number one mission is to undermine the credibility of our entire democracy enterprise of this nation. And so it might be that they wanted us to help them by telling people what they were doing. Their loudness, in a way, would be counting on us to amplify it by telling the American people what we saw and freaking people out about how the Russians might be undermining our elections successfully.
Freaking people out. Essentially making the case that the Russians didn't mind leaving their fingerprints all over this attack because they wanted to freak us out about what they are capable of. Back in February, in Moscow, when Putin's senior advisor was explaining to this Russian audience about Moscow's newfound, soon-to-be demonstrated capabilities in information warfare, this moment that we're having right now, this is kind of the moment that Russia was licking its chops about. This is what they were looking forward to. I'm going to quote David Ignatius again about that presentation in Moscow back in February. Quote, Putin's cyber advisor stressed to the Moscow audience the importance for Russia of having a strong hand in this new domain. If Russia is weak, he explained, it must behave hypocritically in search for compromises. But once it becomes strong, it will dictate to the Western partners, it will dictate to the United States and its allies from the position of power. And so Russian strength, Russian capability, Russian warfare capacity in this regard must be shown off, right? To humble us, to bring us down to size, so that they can then dictate the terms of international relations to us. They can get us to do what they want. Because if they don't, they can almost existentially threaten us with this kind of power. If that is the Russian project here, it sort of helps you to see how serious it is that any American might collude with that Russian project. The FBI confirmed today that they are investigating the Trump campaign to see whether or not they coordinated with the Russian government in this operation. The FBI today would not say how many associates of the president or members of the campaign are subjects of this counterintelligence investigation. The FBI director would not even confirm whether the president himself is a subject of this investigation. But you are starting to see little hints from the White House about some of the different directions in which they maybe would like to divert blame. Asked, for example, about fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn today, the White House press secretary notably stopped defending Mike Flynn as he has done in the past, and in fact, at one point today, referred to Michael Flynn as a, quote, volunteer. Which he was, right? He was a volunteer for the Trump campaign. Okay, but then he was named National Security Advisor. The White House press secretary also described former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort today as somebody who played a, quote, very limited role for a very limited amount of time. He was the campaign manager for Donald Trump, up to and including the time when Donald Trump won the Republican nomination for president. Paul Manafort was brought on board the Trump campaign in March last year, third week of March, almost exactly 1 year ago today. He was brought on board in the same week that Trump, the candidate, inexplicably and without warning, started talking frequently about how terrible he thought NATO was.
NATO is obsolete. It was 67 years, or it's over 60 years old.
What I'm saying is NATO is obsolete. NATO is obsolete, and it's extremely expensive to the United States, disproportionately so. And we should readjust NATO.
NATO is costing us a fortune. And yes, we're protecting Europe with NATO, but we're spending a lot of money. Number one, I think the distribution of costs has to be changed.
Look at the time. The same week that Paul Manafort came on board as Donald Trump's campaign manager, Trump pivoted to this whole new area of talking points. He started insistently and repeatedly volunteering his negative views on NATO, how terrible and obsolete NATO is, and his views specifically that, you know what, NATO isn't fair. The other NATO countries are not paying their fair share, are they? Whether or not the White House is now already pivoting to throwing Paul Manafort, maybe even Mike Flynn, under the bus, it's not inexplicable why candidate Trump might start criticizing NATO at that point in the campaign and sowing dissension and division among NATO countries, hitting this potential sore spot about whether the United States pays too much and other countries don't pay enough. It's not inexplicable why candidate Trump might start doing that. I mean, the uncorroborated dossier of alleged Russian dirt on Donald Trump that was published by BuzzFeed in January after it was handed over to the FBI by a former British MI6 officer. That dossier made, of course, the baseline claim that the Trump campaign was aware of the Russian campaign to attack our election. They were supportive of it. They cooperated with it. It also claims that there was a quid pro quo, that in exchange for Russia's attack on the election to hurt Clinton and help Trump, according to the dossier, quote, the operation had been conducted with the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. In return, the Trump team had agreed to sideline Russian intervention in Ukraine as a campaign issue and to raise U.S./NATO defense commitments to deflect attention away from Ukraine. So in the Christopher Steele dossier, I mean, that's the alleged quid pro quo. Russia attacks the U.S. election for its own purposes, right? But then it also co-ops, corrupts, and collaborates with the Trump campaign in that attack. And the Trump campaign allegedly agrees to take steps to help Russia along the way. Drop that pro-Ukraine platform out of the Republican, that pro-Ukraine plank out of the Republican Party platform, which they did at the convention. Inject a whole new controversy into American and NATO politics. Instead of America being NATO's biggest cheerleader, will instead be its biggest detractor, will make every other country in NATO feel attacked in terms of their financial contributions to that alliance. This is the stuff that the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff, this weekend described as the circumstantial evidence that it wasn't just a Russian attack, that it was a Russian attack with collusion, with cooperation from inside this country, from inside the Trump campaign.
Is it possible that all of these events and reports are completely unrelated and nothing more than an entirely unhappy coincidence? Yes, it is possible. But it is also possible, maybe more than possible, that they are not coincidental, not disconnected, and not unrelated, and that the Russians used the same techniques to corrupt U.S. persons that they employed in Europe and elsewhere. We simply don't know, not yet, and we owe it to the country to find out.
Congressman Adam Schiff is the top Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. He's our guest next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
One second.
I'm working on the fish tanks all the live long day. Right now, I am feeding the anemones, which is pretty cool. So, anyway, let me screw up my camera angle. I'll show you. Well, not screw it up that bad. Didn't want to screw it up that bad. Dum 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 dum. Can you see the anemones eating? Get your girl, Bubbles. Come on, really? I'll tear that shit up. Bye.
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 Where'd you go, Mai? Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so give me just 1 minute. I'm going to set it back up here. I'm not going to hurt myself, though. Alright, that's good enough. Whatever. So, I think that was all of those videos that Rachel Maddow has been so vigilant and wonderful to have. Oh, no, I missed one. Okay, so this one.
Last year,
I don't need to finish that sentence.
June 1st, as part of staffing up for the California primary, the Clinton campaign added somebody new to their communications team. Normal hire, normal expectations. But then a couple weeks after that new staffer got there, his job got very suddenly very weird because something weird started happening in the campaign. And it became his beat, his unexpected responsibility to try to make sense of it, to try to explain it. This thing that nobody had planned for, which is that Russian government hackers had broken into the Democratic Party's computer servers, helped themselves to anything they wanted. Those lifted documents and emails stolen from the Democratic Party and ultimately from the chairman of the Clinton campaign, they ended up becoming ammunition in an attack, a foreign attack on the U.S. election, an attack designed to weaken the Democratic candidate, weaken the Democratic Party, disrupt their strategy, disrupt their communications, and ultimately help the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, win the election. And it's easy enough to say that now, but in the moment, in the chaos of the campaign, it was hard to persuade the public to pay attention to that bigger picture, right? That the election was being disrupted. It was being tilted. It was being externally operated on by a foreign government in favor of the candidate that foreign government preferred. But for that new Clinton staffer, whose job it was to deal with this was his life. He was living this every day. As that campaign nightmare was playing out, it became this new staffer's job to learn everything there was to know about this hacking so he could explain it to the world and answer everybody's questions about it. He watched this hijacking of our election, this attack on our election in real time. He saw clues about what was happening early on. He had to figure it out fast, firsthand, live. And now, as the country is woken up to the magnitude of what happened to us last year, that staffer is ready to talk about it. And I think his perspective on what happened is really valuable in terms of us really understanding what happened and starting to unravel it. Joining us now for this special report is Glenn Kaplan, former senior national spokesperson for the Clinton campaign. His responsibility included handling questions about WikiLeaks and hacking in Russia. Glenn Kaplan, thank you for getting a babysitter and coming back.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I want to get this right. I really want to hear this, and so I'm glad you're able to come back. So you started to tell us this story last night. I want to basically back up and start again at the beginning. From your perspective, what happened first? What was the first thing that got weird?
Well, the first thing that got weird was the Washington Post broke the story in mid-June. DNC had been hacked. And that was the first that it started to get weird. That
you didn't have any indication before that report that had happened to the DNC?
No, we had indication once the report was happening.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they reached out to us for comment, and we were aware of the story a day or two before it broke. But that contact was the first we were aware of the DNC hack. That's the first time it got weird. Where it got disturbing was when a couple of days later, Guccifer 2, through DC Leaks, started dumping
that information.
And Guccifer 2.0 is like a hacking nom de guerre, right? It's just it's a persona.
It's a persona that is believed to be the Russian intelligence by all the cyber experts.
Okay, and the Guccifer 2 leaks ended up on DC Leaks website, which is something that didn't exist prior to the campaign. Nobody had ever heard of.
Correct. And that dump was a massive amount of data of documents that was not user-friendly and was very hard to get your arms around what was there. And therefore, it did not get an enormous amount of coverage and an enormous amount of attention.
What kind of documents was it? It's all stuff internal to the Democratic Party. Is this like the donor list?
It's like donor lists. It's, research books, which is a compilation of clips of vulnerabilities of yourself and your opponents.
Mm-hmm.
I believe a Donald Trump research book.
It's a Democratic auto research on Donald Trump.
Right, but remember at that time Donald Trump famously wasn't paying for self-research.
Right.
So the fact that research book was in there was actually quite interesting to us.
Mm-hmm.
And we believed very, very, from the first dump, that this was intended to help Donald Trump and undermine Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party. This wasn't about trying to hurt both sides or just undermine the election.
Well, certainly in the case, I remember reporting at the time that in the case of the Oppo sort of dossier, Democrats' Oppo dossier on Donald Trump, there's, that being published in June meant that, any ammunition that the Democratic Party politically had against Trump was then spent, was then out there.
It felt like a gift to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
That research book being out was not hurtful of Donald Trump. That was a gift to Donald Trump.
Okay. So
that was one of the tells that very early on this was about hurting us.
And that happened
That's mid-June.
Mid-June. Okay, then what happened next?
Well, what happened next was the WikiLeaks dump on the eve of the Democratic Convention. So if you think about it, this is sort of three shifts. The first is a dump of information in the first place. The Russians have done espionage for decades. That's not new. Every campaign going back for years has probably been surveilled and there's been espionage. It was the information actually being weaponized and put into the public arena was what was new.
What do you mean by that, weaponized?
Meaning actually put in the public arena as opposed to collecting information for a foreign government's information and knowing what campaigns are thinking and things like that, which is the normal.
Rather than them stealing it to use for themselves as the Russian government, they were redeploying it into the American bloodstream to have an effect on the way that we were dealing with each other as Americans.
Correct.
All right. You talked last night about how there was a big shift, an operational shift, essentially, that you saw between that Guccifer, the first leak, and then the WikiLeaks one, that it was far more sophisticated in terms of how it could be weaponized, how it could be used here. I want to get into more detail with you on that in just a second. We're going to take a quick break. Glenn Kaplan is our guest tonight, former senior national spokesperson for the Hillary Clinton campaign, specifically on the issue of the Russian attack at the time. We'll be right back with more in just a second.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.
Yeah. Still working on the fish tanks. Okay. Oh, that's that video about that huge Navy corruption scandal that would normally have been dominating the news, but we all got our country taken away from us, and we're waiting for the people on TV to stop pretending it's any different. But now I think that was all the really juicy mattos, covering the fact, the obvious fact, that this election was fake, not legitimate, not real, in no way was it free and fair, In no way was it fair and balanced. And if you are still okay with what happened to this country, if you are still okay with a bunch of brainwashed people in the minority installing a satellite puppet against the will of the majority of the American people, you are a traitor and you need to repent. Thanks for watching, everybody. Click the like button, subscribe, share this video. Peace.